Okay, shortly after starting the stream, I just realized I keep getting an error from YouTube saying you need to change the video resolution because I'm accidentally streaming in 4K. We're actually streaming in 4K, and it's saying that this is not supported. Error, you need to change the video resolution. The current resolution is 4K, which is not supported. The expected video resolution is 1440p. Okay, I'm gonna have to... So you guys will see the stream will kind of like freeze, and then it'll have to come back. I have to fix this. I have to stop the stream and redo it because I accidentally have it set to 4K. So hold on. Hey Matt, hold on. I'll be right back. Just give it like a couple seconds here. Okay. That should fix it. So yeah, I don't know how that's gonna come out in post because now like that first 2-3 minutes was 4K and the rest of the stream is going to be 1440p. I don't know what YouTube's going to do with that. I don't know how they're going to fix that. But yeah, I hate when that happens because sometimes I use this PC. See, this is the reason why having multiple PCs is a good thing if you're doing production work. Because sometimes I use this PC to record stuff or capture gameplay footage. And to do that, I have to set the resolution up to 4K, like if I'm trying to record in 4K, for example. And I forget to switch it every time I go to live stream. It's almost been like every time I've done that, I've had to restart the stream because I always forget to change it back to 1440p downscale from 4K. Anyway, now that we fixed that, hey guys, what's going on? This is Tech Thursdays, episode 70. This is almost, I don't know, it's going to feel kind of like a repeat session of last week, which felt, at least the second half of last week's felt like a repeat session of the previous week, because there really isn't anything to talk about except Intel 13th, 14th gen, microcode updates inbound, as well as AMD Ryzen 9000 series getting delayed for like 2 to 3 weeks, depending on the model. We can kind of go over into discussion on why this is happening. It's funny because so that section that we did last week about the motherboards for the AMD CPUs, and I remember people in the comments were saying like, yeah, AMD should delay the launch by like a month or two because of this. I don't think that's the reason why this is happening. I don't think that's the reason for the delay, nor do I think the reason for the delay is because of Intel's microcode. I really don't know what the issue is. My assumption is that there was some batch, maybe a batch of CPUs that went through QA without like the full checklist of tests or something, and they wanted to pull those back. So I don't know why they have to delay an entire launch for that reason, rather than just recalling whatever SKU numbers need to be recalled to be revalidated or whatever. I don't know why they're still in the launch, but whatever. You know, it's like 2 weeks. It's not a big deal. It is kind of annoying because I was already planning to do the review. The weird thing is there's no review samples yet, unless some of the tech press are receiving their review samples literally on Friday of this week or maybe sometime next week. I would assume that the review samples are going to be sent out to the press next week so that they would have them for like a 1 week at least for the Ryzen 5 and Ryzen 7, and then 2 full weeks for the Ryzen 9 CPUs. So kind of a weird, I don't know, man. Like, a lot of people are saying that the CPU market is so messed up right now because of all the stuff with Intel and now with AMD delaying the Zen 5 launch. Is an unexpected motherboard drop possible at this point? I don't know. Nero, that's a really good question. I don't think the motherboards have anything to do with it, because I think AMD was pretty clear on the fact that the motherboards aren't going to launch at the same time as the CPUs, which I still don't understand that, because I remember a lot of different CPU launches over the years, and usually the motherboard is the first thing that launches. If the two don't launch together, usually, historically speaking, the motherboard launches alone first by like a few weeks, and then the CPUs come after it. So it is kind of weird how, like, this time around it's backwards. It's like the CPUs are launching, but the motherboards aren't. So you have to, if you want to buy Zen 5 on launch day, which now it's been moved. We're going to talk about that because it was delayed. Actually, let me find that article here. Let's see, where's the... Well, actually, there's a tech power up. I do want to talk about the Intel thing again, because some more info has come out about Intel's thing, Intel's microcode updates. I do want to talk about that. Where is here it is. Okay, so the weird thing is the Ryzen 7 and the Ryzen 5 are going to be launching on August 8th. So they're delayed by like 8 days from the original launch day. Hey guys, what's going on? Hey Capono. Khalifa, what's going on? So the Ryzen 7, the Ryzen 5, they are delayed by 1 week. But the Ryzen 9, so the 16 core and the 12 core, are delayed by 2 weeks. So they're going on sale August 15th. So to me, the only thing that could be wrong is one of two things. Either there's something wrong on the box. Like, for example, if it's a packaging problem, it means that the label, something's mislabeled. Like, something's mislabeled on the box. Like, if you buy, who knows, maybe it's something dumb like, this says Ryzen 7 on the box, but maybe they accidentally packed a Ryzen 9 inside a Ryzen 7 box. It could be something stupid like that, or it could be something where, like I just said earlier, they probably have a list of tests that they do, and maybe the first few batches didn't have all those tests run on them. So that's probably it. That's a good question, Matt. So I'm probably going to get the 9700X. I'm probably going to get the 9700X. You know why? Because that one launches first. So I'm probably going to get so here's what I'm going to do, guys. I'm probably going to get the Ryzen 7 9700X, and we're going to compare it to, and I just so happen to not have the box here. Well, I'm going to compare it to, this says Ryzen 9, but the X3D. So we got X3D and this one, the standard Ryzen 7 7700X. So those two. I'm also going to compare it to the Intel i7 as well, and some older CPUs like the Zen 2 and the Zen 3 and Intel's Rocket Lake. So So yeah, I'm gonna be getting a 9700X on launch day. It just means that I have to wait like another week. That's all it means, which is kind of annoying, but I think that'll make for an interesting CPU to overclock, to be honest. I think the single CCDs are more fun to play around with versus the dual CCD. The dual CCD, to me, when I look at this chart, I'm like, okay, 9700X 65 watt TDP stock. That means that there's a lot of room to overclock. The 9950X is 170 watts default, which means this one you can overclock this, but it's probably not going to be able to overclock as well as the lower wattage because it's already running. It's the same way as like you take any high wattage CPU that exists today, you know, the amount of room to overclock is much less than if the CPU used lower power to start with. So you think the 9950X, if the 9950X is only $499, you're going to get it? Yeah. Yeah, if it is really $499, that's a very good price. You bet it's C6 Visa bets is going to be $750. I don't think so. Okay, I'll tell you guys what I think the prices are going to be. Here, let's open up Paint. Let's go over the pricing. So this is, you know what's really weird? AMD hasn't sent review samples, nor have they even announced the pricing yet, which is really odd this far close to launch. So I think this one is going to be either this one's going to be like $599 to $649. This is what I think the prices are going to be. I think it's going to be in that range, 600 to 650. I don't know if it's going to be 700. I don't think it's going to be 700. It could be though. That could be the highest. That could be the highest. So here, if we want to give the largest range, that is the maximum range. The 9900X is probably going to be $499 to $549. I think that's going to be the price of that one. Ryzen 7 9700X is going to be $399, $449. I think it's going to be in that price range. So the lowest this could be is like $349. So we'll give it a $100 range. Even though I've given this one a $100 range, I've given this one a $50 range. That's because it's kind of wedged between these two. And then that one could be that. And then the Ryzen 5 9600X is going to be anywhere from like $249, which I don't think is going to be that cheap, up to like $299. These are the prices that I think they're going to be. Somewhere in this range. The prices always start off... Anytime a CPU is new, the price is always higher. If they want to be aggressive, the number will be these. But I don't really think they're going to need to do that. Because you have to keep in mind, what are the current prices for the existing Ryzen 7000? You see what I'm saying? Like the Ryzen 7000, you can already get those for prices that are just below these based off of their respective tier. So obviously the Ryzen 9000 is going to be more expensive than what the 7000 is selling for. So yeah, I kind of think to me, these are realistic prices. I don't see them deviating too much from this range for any of these. 7900X3 fell off a cliff. Yeah, but you know what's funny about that CPU? That's one of the best CPUs that mining people buy for mining. So, best CPUs for mining are the Ryzen... I'll just say 5950X is still really good. 7950X is very good, but it's more expensive. And then the 7900X3D. I don't know why the mining people buy this one over the non-X3D, but it's just they buy this one. I don't know why. Like, this is what... I know this because people have been telling me this. And then the other one would be like, if you can find a 3950X used, like this one is also very, very good in the used market for CPU mining. But like these are the ones. And then after that, it would be like 7900X, 5900. You know, like all the 12 cores fall in line here. And it just goes down the list from there. So 9700X can't be more than 349. No, I think it can. I wouldn't be surprised if that one's $400. So, because that one, the thing is, that one could be a very good overclocking chip. Because it's the full, so it's basically the CCD that has like all 8 cores. So it's the higher bin CPU versus the Ryzen 5. So yeah, I think it can sell for like $399 easily. Especially if you're near a Micro Center, because then you get the motherboard bundle with the DDR5. Although I don't know if they're going to be doing the DDR5 bundle. Micro Center typically has the $30 motherboard bundle, meaning like if you purchase the CPU and you choose a motherboard, they give you $30 off the motherboard. So that's why that one at $400 plus $30 off the motherboard. You know, any random B650 motherboard or whatever. Yeah, that's still going to be very good value. So, but yeah, I was just kind of listing all the CPUs for mining, but this was to answer the comment about like, what about this one? The price on this is really, really good right now for CPU mining. So, but anyway, we're not here to talk about CPU mining. It's memory you don't want? What do you mean you don't want? You're going to need DDR5. Oh, you mean well, if it's free memory, it's what's bad about it. It's free memory. You know, that you can't complain about free. Free is always good. You will benchmark this versus this. Yeah, so if I do, okay. If it's a canned benchmark, if it has that info, I can show that info. If it's a benchmark that I manually run, yes, I can save the 1% and 0.1%. I think the 0.1% is kind of pointless though, because that always 0.1% is kind of a pointless metric because you have no control over whether some Windows background process decides to do something in the background while you're benchmarking, and that could just cause the 0.1% to just be bad for that one benchmark. So that's why I don't like 0.1%. To me, that's kind of not a very good thing to look at. But yeah, 1% minimum typically is all you really need, to be honest. So I usually don't show 0.1% because it's pointless. Like, I can do one run where my 0.1 is like 35 FPS. Then I can do another run and the 0.1 is like 50 FPS. Then I do a third run and I get like 10 FPS on the 0.1. That's the reason why the 0.1 to me is kind of a useless metric to look at, because I don't have control over Windows deciding to try to index files in the background when it decides to do it. You know what I'm saying? So or like it wants to do a check for Windows Update, or it wants to do some whatever, or Steam wants to do a patch on the side or whatever. Like, that's the problem with 0.1%. Like, 0.1% always gets impacted by the most random, bizarre task that happens in the operating system. So, yeah, so basically, if I'm going to be showing CPU benchmarking, this is what I'm going to show. I'll show a mix of productivity. I did not spell that correctly. Productivity. I'm going to show, so this would be stuff like decompression and compression. We're going to look at rendering, because the rendering stuff also kind of shows you the sort of stuff that you can expect when you're doing shader compilation, for example. That's another really good one to show. And then the other thing too would be like your typical like Cinebench. You can expect to see Cinebench and Geekbench and all that stuff. But then for the gaming, what I'm only going to do for gaming will only be shown at 1080p resolution. I'm not going to show 1440p. I'm not going to show 4K because with 1440p, yeah, 1440p still, you can see the difference between the CPUs at 1440p, but it's not as pronounced. So what's the point of looking at it when all it does is it just closes everything closer together? Then as soon as you go to 4K, it just closes everything even closer together. So that's the reason why I feel like 1440p and 4K for CPU benchmarks is a waste of time. If anything, 720p would actually be more useful to look at. But I don't like 720p because sometimes with 720p, you're going to see games hit their... Like if a game has an internal engine cap, like if the game literally can't run above 500 frames per second or 300 frames per second, because some games, believe it or not, they have internal limiters where they will not go above a certain number. And that's the reason why 720p benchmarking is kind of... Nobody really does it because of that reason. So that's why I don't really do 720p benchmarking. But 1440p is not really... Like, I don't see the point of 1440p benchmarking for CPU. Because if I show you 1080p, like you can clearly see the difference. Like the bar chart will show clearly defined differences between the CPUs. Now, if I do 1440p, it's basically the same thing, except now the bar charts are narrower. So the gaps are not as defined. And that's the reason why I don't like 1440p for CPU benchmarking. And 4K is not for CPU benchmarking. Like I'm not going to do 4K at all for CPU benchmarking because it's not going to show a significant difference. What about ray tracing? Is that CPU heavy? Ray tracing is too game dependent to consider it. So I will not be... Well, I don't know. I got to look at it. What I'll do is I'll probably look at some games that have ray tracing. But one of the games... I'll give you guys an example of what to expect from my review. There will be results for Dragon's Dogma 2. Dragon's Dogma 2 currently is the most CPU-bound game in existence today. There is no other game that is more CPU-heavy than Dragon's Dogma 2. And the reason why I can say that is because I have been currently benchmarking some CPUs, believe it or not. I have been benchmarking CPUs in preparation for the Ryzen 9000 review. So I've gone back and I've started benchmarking old CPUs, and I did Dragon's Dogma 2, and what I can tell you is that it's still terrible to run. No, Capcom did not fix it. It still runs terrible in Vernworth. There's literally like no difference between launch and today in terms of Dragon's Dogma 2 CPU performance. So Dragon's Dogma 2 will definitely be shown in the benchmark list. I don't know if I'm going to use ray tracing. I think I will actually show ray tracing results for Dragon's Dogma 2 because it doesn't really do much. But yeah, ray tracing isn't normally CPU. Yeah, like Matt's saying, it's not really. It can be, but it's too game dependent. That's the reason why, honestly, I'll probably not show ray tracing. For most of the games that I plan to test, I will not be showing ray tracing results because that is definitely more of a GPU scenario. So we're going to be looking at CPUs here, and I don't want ray tracing to mess with the results from one game versus another, because if one game has ray tracing, like super hardcore ray tracing, then another game does like barely any ray tracing, but you just turn it on. Like, why? You know what I'm saying? Like, you turn it off on both of them, and then the frames are more consistent across the board. So I'd rather show results that look that way rather than have one game look terrible and another game look excellent, just because one has ray tracing that's super hard to run and the other one has ray tracing that's barely nothing. So that's the reason why, no, I'm probably not going to show ray tracing. It really depends on the game, though. But yeah, Dragon's Dogma 2, man, that game is, like, that game and Star Wars Jedi Survivor, are very, very CPU bound. Although I don't know, the problem with Jedi Survivor is EA. EA is a problem. EA is the bane of my existence when it comes to benchmarking games. So unfortunately, I will not be able to do Star Wars Jedi Survivor. Maybe in the future, I can do Jedi Survivor for different, like, one-off videos. Because the problem with Jedi Survivor is as soon as I change my CPU, I can change my CPU twice, and then, like, if I try to log in again to Jedi Survivor, EA basically hits me with DRM and, like, locks my account, so I can't play Jedi Survivor. So this is the same thing that happened with Wild Hearts, and that's the reason why I refunded that game. And because of that, I cannot, like, if this was a GPU comparison, I could do Jedi Survivor, but because it's a CPU one, I can't do it, because every time I change a CPU, EA's like, you're hacking us, we're turning you off, you can't play the game anymore. Just because it's like, what? All I did was swap CPUs. And the stupid EA DRM is like, I don't trust you, I don't trust you, you can't play the game right now, you're locked out, you're locked out. So it's like, okay, fine, we're just not going to show Jedi Survivor. Thankfully, Dragon's Dogma 2 is even more CPU bound than Jedi Survivor. So it's like, I'll just use Dragon's Dogma. So no big deal. 4090, you can do 1440, 60 path tracing in the games. Yeah, that doesn't mean anything. Because we're talking about CPU benchmarks. You turn ray tracing on for photos. Some games, ray tracing looks worse, actually. I don't know how Hogwarts Legacy has changed, but when Hogwarts Legacy first came out, ray tracing was kind of broken in that game. Like, you go into a bathroom in Hogwarts, and you turn ray tracing on, and it's like 9 a.m. in the morning, and there's literally God rays all over the bathroom stalls that are not supposed to be there. So you turn ray tracing off, and then it looks normal. So I've seen that kind of thing too. So I'm not a huge fan of ray tracing. I think it's an interesting technology. I think it's too early right now to consider it as a serious thing. So yeah, no, this is basically what I'm going to be testing. And we're going to be testing the following CPUs. We're going to be testing them as far back as 5 years ago. So we're going to have the Ryzen. So here, let me just type this. So people that are tuning in now, these are the test CPUs for the 9700X review. So I'm just kind of giving you guys kind of a sneak peek. There's literally nothing else to talk about because the CPUs were delayed for like 2 weeks. And I've already been trying to work on the review on the side. So basically, we're going to be testing a Ryzen 7 3800X. So we're going to be doing 3800X. This is Zen 2. Then we have a Ryzen 7 5800X. This is Zen 3. So we're going to be comparing those in this review. Because here's the thing. Not everybody upgrades their CPUs every generation. A lot of people out there are still on 5-year-old 3800X or 3700X. Or 3600 or whatever. So there's a lot of people that are still on Zen 2. This is as far back as I will go because this is considered 5 years. And typically, what I like to say is people upgrade in 3, 5, and 7 years. Those are the normal. Those are what I consider the normal upgrade paths. If you upgrade more frequently than 3 years. So keep that in mind. So think about it like this. This is the 3-year, it's going to be 4-year soon, but this is technically the 3-year cycle. This one is definitely the 5-year cycle. See, I'm trying to make my review unique in that I look at it from the perspective of not everybody is a tech enthusiast. Not everybody upgrades their PC every year. So if you're somebody who upgrades more frequently than 3 years, so let's say you're someone who upgrades every year, or you upgrade every generation. Like, for example, I'll use myself as an example. So here's a 7700X. What did I do with the 7700X? Oh, I upgraded to a 7800X 3D. And now what am I about to do? I'm about to upgrade again to a 9700X. So I am not the person that I'm describing in this review. I'm talking about people who upgrade on a 3-year cycle or a 5-year cycle or even more, like a 7-year cycle. But the reason why I'm not going to show 7-year or longer is because the understanding is if you wait 5 years, if you use the same CPU for 5 years, you pretty much had the PC for the duration of an entire AMD socket's lifespan, if you think about it that way. So you think about Zen 1, you think about AM4. AM4 came out in 2017. AM5 came out in 2022. So that's like, what, 5 years. So again, that's kind of the maximum life cycle you can expect for a socket. So if you're someone who has a 7-year-old PC or a 10-year-old PC, it doesn't matter what you upgrade to because it's going to be so much faster than what you currently have that, you know, it's irrelevant. And that's the reason why I don't do 7-year like results. I'm not going to go benchmark like a Bulldozer or an Intel i7 Sandy Bridge or something like that because those things are like so ancient. And these CPUs already crush those CPUs. There's no reason to even show that. So that's why I'm doing what I'm doing. So we're going to do 5-year, 3-year. And we're also going to show the i7 11700K. This is the Rocket Lake. We got Rocket Lake in the house. This is for people that are on the... This is going to be a 3-year cycle person or individual looking to upgrade. And then we have the i7 12700K Alder Lake as well. This is someone who is on a... I would say this is the 2 to 3 year. Technically, Alder Lake is still only 2.5 years old. It will be 3 years old in November of this year. So keep that in mind. It is getting kind of old, but it is still one of the more modern CPUs. So, and then obviously we have the Ryzen 7 7700X. This is the Zen 4, so that one will also be in there. This is now for people who upgrade every generation. And then I will also show the Ryzen 7 7800X 3D. This is also Zen 4. So this is like last year. So this is basically, if someone wants to upgrade from this or this to a 9700X, that's the reason why we're including these results. Now, what I expect to see is, because I've already done all the benchmarking for the 7800X 3D. Currently, out of all these CPUs, I'll tell you guys what I've completed. I have completed all testing for the 3800X, and I've completed all testing for the 7800X 3D. Currently, I still need to test Zen 3 and these old Intel CPUs, and I need to swap my X3D back down to a 7700X and then test Zen 4 non-X3D. So this is on my to-do list, working on the review. But currently, I have all my results for Zen 2 and the 7800X 3D. So I think this list covers a lot of potential users that would be interested in upgrading. So anything older, if your CPU is older than what's shown on this list, then it's going to benefit even more. And if it's newer than these, I mean, there's not really anything that much newer than a 7800X 3D, except for the Zen 5 CPUs, and I guess maybe Intel's Raptor Lake refresh CPUs. But yeah, I don't, honestly, if somebody has 14th gen or any Raptor Lake or some of the Zen 4 stuff, like the X3D, like the 7800X 3D, I don't really know if upgrading is even worth it, but we'll see. I'm gonna reserve judgment on that when I actually get the Zen 5 CPU in hand. I'm missing unfortunately, I don't have a 5800X 3D. I wish I did. I really wish I had a Zen 3 X3D. That would have been a good one to include. I really, really wish I had this 5800X3D because I would definitely include that one. But yeah, these are the CPUs that I have to test. This is what I plan to test for the comparison with the 9700X. Now, I have other CPUs. I have like Ryzen 9. I have Intel i9. But I'm not going to test those against this. I will test those CPUs, but I'm not going to put them in the review with the 9700X because I'm someone who doesn't believe. My philosophy is you compare CPUs based off of their price points. So you'll never see me make a video like 14900K versus 7800X3D. I don't consider that a fair comparison. So I will not make that type of video. That goes against my philosophy. The same reason why you'll never see me do 7950X or 7950X3D versus 7800X3D. Because again, those are different CPUs. They are meant for different use cases, different target demographics, different users. And that's the reason why we will not compare those, because those are not the proper comparison. That would be like that would be like if I made a video showing RTX 4090 versus RTX 4070. Like, what's the point of making that video? Like, why would I compare a $2,000 GPU to a $500 GPU? You see what I'm saying? Like, it doesn't make any sense. Like, it's an irrelevant comparison. It's like, okay, yeah, one of them is a lot faster at 4K than the other, but okay, like what? See, that's why we don't do these type of comparisons on this channel. But yeah, if I do end up getting a 9950X, then yes, the 9950X will be compared to a 7950X3D, a 7950X, a 14900K, a 13900K. Like, those are the sort of CPUs that will be compared against the 9950X because those are in that same price point and those are of similar core and thread count. So that's how I do things. Not everybody does it that way, but I try to think of it like if I have $400 to spend on a CPU, that automatically eliminates the Ryzen 9s. That automatically eliminates the i9s. So it's like I'm confined to a specific set, which is typically an i7 or a Ryzen 7. And that's the reason why I'm going to be reviewing them against those type of SKUs. If you have X3D, you upgrade to a 9000X3D. Well, I mean, that would probably be the more natural upgrade path. You went from 10700 to 7800X3D. Yeah. Yeah, and that would be kind of like what you just described is basically like going from this to that, because the 11th gen was very, very similar to the 10th gen overall. Yeah. But yeah, these are what we're gonna have. This is what I've got. I'm not a super giant YouTube channel that has access to all the CPUs under the sun. So I have to use what I've got. So that's basically how we're doing this. When is AMD going to change the IO die? I think they did. That brings us into the next thing to talk about. The actual changes. So right here. So Phoronix has a really good article that was literally published yesterday, I think. Yeah, it was yesterday. So they go over, so these are the slides from the AMD Tech Day that took place, I think it was 2 weeks ago. Or I don't think it was last week, I think it was 2 weeks ago. Or maybe it was, okay, it was last week. Follow up to last week. Or no, the actual Tech Day was 2 weeks ago. But here are the slides. And what's interesting here is these go into all the details of what actually changed. So this is considered a more significant change structurally or architecturally compared to the change from Zen 3 to Zen 4, because Zen 3 to Zen 4 was basically they did a node shrink for the cores and they put a DDR5 memory controller in the IO die. And that's basically what they changed. So, but here with Zen 5, they changed a lot of things actually. So the I/O die is the node that it's made on is still the same, but there are differences to it. There were changes made to it, particularly the memory controller, which we'll talk about that, and then also stuff with the fabric was also adjusted. You got the Aorus Master. Man, all these people getting Aorus Master for such good prices. $340 for the Aorus Master is a really good price. So the only thing that we can kind of make an assumption comparing those motherboards is the newer ones might actually have better memory traces. So the newer ones might be able to run DDR5 at higher speeds. The other thing that we don't know is whether or not the newer CPUs will be able to handle 4 sticks of DDR5 better than 2 sticks. Or I guess if X870 can handle 4 sticks of memory better than X670 can. Because one of the biggest complaints about DDR5, and this applies to every DDR5 motherboard today, and this is both AMD and Intel. This is not just AMD. This is also Intel. Like 4 sticks of DDR5 is very hard to run at higher speeds. Like it's really, really hard to run DDR5 2 DPC dual rank. So I mean, we've done. I have videos. I suggest if somebody's interested in 128 gigs of memory or 192 gigabytes of memory, DDR5, not DDR4, we're talking DDR5. I highly recommend you check out the video on my channel that I did back in, I think it was January or February of this year. Look up I think the title of the video is like 192 gigabyte DDR5 max tuned Zen, like Ryzen, whatever. I show how to actually get DDR5 to run at like 6,000 across 4 sticks of memory, and this is a lot of memory. I also did a more recent one. Actually, I did a way more recent one, which is actually easier to mimic, but it's single rank. So we did 96 gigs of memory, DDR5, across 4 sticks. That's 4x24. We show how to run that at 6,000, 100% stable. So that is... it's not that easy to do because it requires knowledge of something called the impedance values. You have to adjust the impedance values on your motherboard, which is different from voltages. See, a lot of people, when it comes to overclocking memory, a lot of people think, oh, I need to bump up my voltage. Well, actually, no, you don't, and you don't really want to, because if you make your voltage go higher, you make your RAM run a lot hotter, and that's going to limit the upper speed and the overclockability, so as well as stability. So it's not about voltage. When you want to run 4 sticks of DDR5, this also applies to DDR4, but because DDR5 clocks so much faster than DDR4, and you have 4 sticks in close proximity to each other, they're going to run hotter just naturally because there's no space between them now with those giant heat spreaders on them. So yeah, anybody who wants to do 4 sticks of DDR5, it can be done with Zen 4, and it can be done with X670. It just requires understanding of adjusting impedance values. I have a lot of videos on that topic, so if you're someone who's interested in that, go check out those videos. I did a lot of videos earlier this year on that specific subject because I kept getting comments on my older videos from the previous year, back when DDR5 was new, and nobody had any idea how to overclock DDR5, or run 4 sticks of DDR5, and it was kind of a mess all over the place. So if you're running 4 sticks for a total of 64, that's not that hard to do. It's only hard when you're running dual rank. So we're talking like 48 gig DIMM or 32 gig DIMM. So, you're running like 4 times 32 or 4 times 48. That's 128 or 192 respectively. So that's when it's really, really challenging. But yeah, a total of 64 across 4 times, 4 times 16, that's not that hard to do on DDR5. You can do that without too much trouble. 4 sticks is hard on the memory controller. 4 sticks is hard on the memory controller because of all the signal, because of all the active signals going to and from the memory controller. That's why. The best example I can give you guys, remember this. 2 sticks of DDR5 is like 4 sticks of DDR4. So if you guys remember, 4 sticks of DDR4, back when DDR4 was newer, it was hard to do. Like 4 sticks of DDR4 was hard to do. A lot of people would say, oh, just get the biggest DIMM and do 2 sticks. That same logic applies to DDR5 today. In fact, it's more relevant to DDR5 than it is to DDR4 because DDR4 is so much more mature now that it's easier to do 4 sticks of DDR4. But keep in mind, 2 sticks of DDR5 is roughly equivalent to 4 sticks of DDR4. That means if you want to run 4 sticks of DDR5, think of that as though you were running 8 sticks of DDR4. So that's a lot of memory sticks. So that's the reason why it's DDR5 is a technology that was heavily intended for servers and data centers. It wasn't really well adapted, I would say, to the consumer market, which would basically be laptops and desktops. And that's the reason why I feel like there's a lack of understanding by the public at large in terms of the behaviors of DDR5. For example, DDR5 takes significantly longer to initialize and train compared to DDR4. And a lot of people don't really understand, like, why does it take longer for the PC to post compared to an older PC? Well, that's because the DDR5 is trying to initialize and do all kinds of self-tests that you kind of don't really do with DDR4. Like, it skips a lot of steps. Now, there is a feature that exists in the BIOS called Memory Context Restore, which tries to cache a lot of those values that it used on the previous boot cycle. It caches that into the BIOS. So on the BIOS chip, I don't even think it's the BIOS chip itself, somewhere on the motherboard, there is like a tiny little like flash ROM memory, or not ROM, but like a flash memory that the Memory Context Restore from the UEFI, it will save these values into a table and save those. So the next time you power cycle the computer, it will load those values immediately, and then therefore skipping all of the training, and then it allows the PC to function very similar to how the older DDR4 and DDR3 behaved. Memory Context Restore breaks sometimes, though. Yes, thank you for mentioning that. I was going to say that. The thing about Memory Context Restore is sometimes, if the computer has been asleep or has been powered off long enough, and if there's some kind of interruption to the power or something, if the pull-up circuit drains out and whatever was holding those values in that table in the flash memory, if that goes to nothing, like if the voltage goes to flat 0, those values get lost. And as a result of that, when you turn on the computer again, the memory training has to happen again because those cached values are lost. And that's the reason why sometimes you will see the DDR5 will have to retrain even if you have Memory Context Restore enabled. So that is something that I never really understood, if that problem was a limitation of the current motherboard BIOSes themselves, or the chipset, or was it like a chipset limitation, or was it a BIOS limitation, or was it a DDR5 limitation, or was it a memory controller? I don't think it's the memory controller, because the CPU doesn't really do anything with the RAM when it's asleep or when it's turned off. So I don't really know what causes the MCR to be lost. It's better not to cache. Well, okay, we're using the word cache, but keep in mind that when I'm saying it's caching the values, it's storing the values, it's not putting them in the CPU. Remember that. It's putting them somewhere on the motherboard. There's a tiny little flash memory. Maybe it's a piece of the BIOS chip itself that saves those. It's probably the BIOS chip. It saves those values for the memory into that BIOS chip. And I guess if it loses full power, if it's powered off long enough, like if you unplug the computer from the wall and let the computer just like run the capacitors down to zero and let the power supply run all the way out to zero, I think it's going to have to retrain the memory, because I think that stuff is dependent on like residual voltage in the capacitors to store those values for MCR. That's my theory. I don't know if that's actually correct, but my understanding is if the fact that sometimes you have to retrain DDR5, like I'll tell you guys, like from my own experience, I would say I have seen my Aorus Master have to retrain DDR5 probably once a month, I would say. It happens like once a month. I would say about once every month it has to retrain the DDR5. But it's rare. So it's almost like something in there, like something causes it to drain the capacitors when the computer's off, and then you turn it on one day and then just has to retrain the memory. I see code 15, and I'm like, okay, it's doing the DDR5 thing because it just needs to do the DDR5 thing. So I don't know. Caching can make things faster, but too much cache in old cache can make things harder. Well, I've never had a problem with memory context restore. Like, I've been using memory context restore since the launch of Zen 4. And I remember when these CPUs first came out, people were saying don't use MCR, keep it turned off, disable it. But I would always use it, and I never had problems. And I mean, one day it would retrain. I would just let it sit there, and it's like, okay, this time it has to take 40 seconds to boot compared to the typical 15 seconds, but okay, it wants to do its memory training. So I would just accept it. That's how it is. That's a DDR5 thing. But yeah, these are the sort of things, though, that I'm really curious to know if Zen 5 and the new microcode can solve this problem, or if the newer motherboards like X870, X870E, if those motherboards also are able to solve the problem with the occasional memory context restore, lost all the values, now we have to retrain because I forgot all my memory timings. Like, you know what I'm saying? Like, at some point, that problem I expect to go away. Like, I don't expect that to always exist as a thing. Do we have any idea if we'll be able to 192? So 192 today, the highest you can get is 6,000. But I don't think it's going to depend on the motherboard, and it's going to depend on the RAM. And even then, it may not even be fully stable. So what I can tell you is with my own personal testing, I can get 5600. I can get 192 gigs of RAM at 5600 working. I can get 6,000 working, but the MCR will not store the values long term at 6,000. So that tells me that there's something, like, it's just too extreme. The frequency for the 4 sticks dual rank is just too much. It's too much for the motherboard or the memory controller. It's one or the other. I don't know. It's or both. And that's the thing. So that's the thing. Keep in mind that I don't know if you guys ever had like Zen 1 and X370 way back in the day, but those old motherboards and the old memory controller of Zen 1 had the exact same problems with like trying to run 4 sticks of memory and as much memory as possible. Like trying to run 64 gigs, so like 4x16 DDR4 at like 2933 or better was like really, really hard to do. That was really hard to do back in the day. And that's the reason why I'm saying like 5600, 192 gigs, 5600 is very, very hard to do as well. That's basically like 3200 DDR4. So, yeah, I'm speaking from somebody who ran. So, here, I'm just gonna, here, I'll label what I had. So I've tested, or I used to have the Ryzen 7 1800X with Crosshair X370, or it was like, what is it? X370 Crosshair 6 Hero. This combo. Back in the day, I was running 32 gigabytes, 4x8, 14, 14, 14, 34, 1.35 volts, Samsung B die. You guys know what this RAM is. Anybody who has Zen 1 knows exactly what this RAM is. This is the G-Skill Flare X. The most famous RAM, Samsung B die. This is what I was running back in the day. This was like my very first Ryzen computer right here. This. And I'll tell you guys, it was a real pain to get 3200, because this RAM was 3200 DDR4. It was a real pain to get 4 sticks running at the rated speed. But I managed to get it working, and I ran it like that until I could get Zen 2, the 3800X. As soon as I got this thing right here, 3800X, it was bye-bye 1800X, you're out of here. 3800X solved all the problems, all the memory challenges, we'll say, with Zen 1. They immediately went away overnight as soon as I upgraded to Zen 2. Immediately when I went to a 3800X, it was like super easy to do 4 sticks of memory. It was super easy to do 3200 or even faster, 3600. But it was way easy to do 4 sticks at 3200 on Zen 2. And then Zen 3 was just as easy, if not even easier. So, to me, this is the reason why, like, I'm just telling you guys from my own personal experience with Zen 1. And this is the reason why I was telling people, like, if you're considering upgrading, you might as well wait for Zen 5. Because it's so close to the launch that you might as well wait. Because I'm thinking like, okay, this or this. Do I want a 1800X or a 3800X? And that's kind of like what the sort of situation we're in now, where there's the 7700X, which is like the first generation DDR5, just like how this was the first generation DDR4 versus the second generation DDR4. So it's going to be like Zen 4 is first gen DDR5. Zen 5 is second gen DDR5. So that's the reason why I'm thinking, yeah, man, just because of the memory stuff, like, there's going to be some improvements. There's got to be a lot of improvements across the board when it comes to DDR5 capability with this new Ryzen 9000 series. I mean, why wouldn't they improve it? I mean, what else is there, right? Like, they did the whole AVX512. I mean, let's get into what they actually did. I think all this conjecture and speculating, we don't even need to do that anymore because they've already published all the slides. Okay, so the design objectives were to deliver another major single-thread and multi-thread performance increase, new foundation of compute for the future, AVX 512 on a full 512-bit data path. Okay, they've talked a lot about that, which is actually, okay, that's all good stuff. Platform support, deliver Zen 5, deliver Zen 5C. Is there a way to make this larger? Is there any way that I can make this, like... That's like a single slide. Well, anyway. Support configurable floating point 512 and 256 data path. There's the Zen 5 and the Zen 5C. They renamed the C. It used to stand for cloud because it was meant to be in cloud only. Now they've renamed it to compact. Support scaling and energy efficiency. Support all these new nanometer things. Support. Okay, yeah, that's all nice. That's good. But where's the stuff about the memory? So here, next gen branch predictor. So they did a lot of stuff to the front end actually. But these are the sort of things that only time will tell how much of a difference this makes in the long run, because some of this stuff is dependent on software to actually be written in a way where it can really benefit from all these changes. But that's true for any CPU design. And that's the reason why, like, I'll give you guys another example. Well, when Intel made big core, little core, they were making some big bets that applications would be written in a way that they could scale, or operating systems in general, like Windows, would be able to scale in a way where they could push the background tasks to the E-cores while running the main focused window in the P-cores. Now, obviously, Windows was Microsoft and Windows was incapable of implementing that properly on their own. So what did Intel do? They had to create their own thing at a much lower level, which was called Thread Director, and that's why Thread Director exists. Because you guys, I don't know if you guys are aware, but when Alder Lake launched, there were a lot of problems early on with certain games and DRM, like Denuvo and anti-cheat engines and those things not working properly, because the big core, little core thing, it was like, hey, I don't understand, this person's hacking. You're banned. Like, games were not working correctly, especially games that had anti-cheat software in them, or things that had kernel level access were just completely confused by the CPU. Like, why is there a CPU? Why is there a core that has this much cache, but there's a core that has that much cache, and this one does hyperthreading and that one doesn't do hyperthreading? I think this person's cheating. We're gonna shut this application down. That's basically how they behaved back when Alder Lake was new. It was so bad that they had to release a BIOS update that enabled something called compatibility mode, which basically turned your scroll lock button on your keyboard into a toggle that would literally park all the E-cores so that Windows would not assign anything to the E-cores. That was their workaround in software at a firmware level to fix the issue until the software developers of these applications would actually rewrite their code so they would not, it would be able to work properly with the big core, little core. So this is the sort of thing, like when they make big bets on the future, when you implement all these changes to the processor in terms of the circuit design, the core design, the cache design, all those different parts, it really depends on the software to be able to use it effectively. One thing they I think on this, did they move to a 6-way? On the they used to have a 4-way. I think it's on a different slide. But what I really want to see is here we go. This one. Or actually, where's the one with the memory? Is it this one? No, that's just memory management. It doesn't talk about changes to the I/O die. The reason you got the master is because you got a pretty good deal. Yeah, it is a very good deal. And that's a very good motherboard. New decode, wider dispatch, execute. Okay. Okay. This is an interesting one. This is actually probably the most useful slide in doing a direct comparison in terms of what was changed in the architecture. So the L1, the L1 and L2 B2B, Zen 4 used the 1.5K over 7K. I'm not sure. This is level 1 cache. I don't know. Is that really level 1 cache? I don't know if that's level 1 cache. They went from 1.5K to 16K on the L1. That's a huge change. I don't know if that's actually level 1 cache. I'm not sure what L1, L2 BTB is in this sense. I don't think that's level 1. Maybe it is. Level 1 cache, level 2 cache. That's a huge difference though. If L1 went from 1.5K to 16K, that's huge. Return address stack is 32 on Zen 4. It's 52 on Zen 5. The TLB level 1, level 2 went from 64 over 512 to 64 over 2048. So basically, Zen 5 has bigger numbers. And the way they're able to do this is node shrink. It's a node shrink because aren't they going to like 4? Is it the 4 nanometer or the 3 nanometer? I can't even remember. I don't even know what node they're doing, guys. Like, I forget. I think it's 4 nanometer for Zen 5. I know it's not the latest and greatest one. I know Apple and Intel are using TSMC's latest node. And this is where AMD stands to save a lot of money here because they didn't go with the latest node. So they're not paying the most amount of money imaginable to get the right node from this. It was only a 6% node density increase. Yeah, but because of the node density increase, that is how they're able to get these larger numbers. I mean, that's how they're able to get the bigger numbers because of that node shrink. Because they can fit more transistors now. That's basically, so it's a balancing act with processor design. It's a balancing act between power, area, what is the other one? Temperature, and like there's a fourth one which I'm forgetting right now. So 1 megabyte per 8 watt, 1 megabyte per 16 watt. There was one thing that I think they actually changed to a smaller number. I can't remember what it was though. Oh no, they did go to a bigger one. So they went from, okay, I'm looking for the ops cycle, macro ops per cycle. So the dispatch bandwidth was 6 on Zen 4, now it's 8 on Zen 5. That was actually changed. Because for some reason I thought they went to a 4, but no, they didn't. Okay. L2 bandwidth is also doubled, so they went from 32 bytes per clock to 64 bytes per clock. So in general, there's a lot of potential here. Just looking at the architectural differences, there's a lot of potential. Like the vector register went from 192 to 384. Now I know that's not like a GPU bus. So don't think Zen 4 was a 192-bit bus and Zen 5 is a 384-bit bus. No, that's not what this means. This basically means that the register size is larger, but remember, this is nothing like a memory bus width on a GPU. But in general, bigger number better. Op cache associativity was 12-way on Zen 4. I think it was 8-way on Zen 3, or maybe it was 10-way or something. Now it's 16-way on Zen 5. So there's a lot of things that they actually changed when you look at this. But what I really wanted to look at was the memory controller. If they have anything on the memory controller in here. Okay. Core complex. Double the L2 associativity, double the L2 bandwidth. Yeah, because they went from what, 4 to 8, we just say. Double the L2 bandwidth, low latency, level 3 with 320 L3 in-flight misses. Yeah, basically the name of the game is to reduce the number of times the pipeline has nothing in it. So your CPU busy effectively, your your cores are being utilized more efficiently on every clock cycle. That's the name of the game with IPC. Like, how many instructions per cycle can the CPU do? That's what this is. But I remember I thought there was a slide that actually showed, okay, is this it? No, this is Strix Point. Strix Point is interesting if you're interested in the laptop market, but this isn't what I was looking for. What's cool about this, though, is you can see that they did the 4 Zen 5 cores, and then they did 8 Zen 5C cores. So this is this is very similar. It's not exactly the same, but it's very similar to Intel's big core, little core. So it's almost like the Zen 5 is like a P core, and the Zen 5C is like an E core. You can kind of think of it like an E core, but it's not exactly like an E core because it's still a lot larger than an E core, and it still has like a lot more cache per core. But it's like the L2, for instance, is the same. Like 1 megabyte L2 per core on Zen 5, and also 1 megabyte per core on Zen 5C. So, yes, this is monolithic. This whole thing that's shown here is the die itself. And you can see the Infinity Fabric, which is normally what the I/O die would be, is right there in the middle. The only difference is the regular Zen 5 has double the L3. Yeah, the difference is the L3. So that's the reason why you can kind of think of it similar to Intel's big core, little core, but it's not exactly the same because the E cores are way more constrained on bandwidth and cache compared to the P cores in an Intel CPU. I thought they had one for the Zen 5. Is this it? Granite Ridge SoC. Okay, yeah. This is it. This is what I wanted to look at. So this is what is going to be in like a 9950X. And if we wanted to look at a 9700X, you basically delete one of these two CCDs at the top. So this down here is the I/O die, and then you have these two CCDs up here. And you have 8 core per CCD. Now, what'll be interesting to see with Zen 6, so I would say that what we see with Strix Point, this could be a preview into what we see on the desktop on the next generation, on like Zen 6. If not Zen 6, then Zen 7. Now, meaning they could do like a CCX that has 12 cores. You have 4 big cores, and then you have 8 medium cores, so that's a 12 core CCX right there. So if you take 2 of these, so for example, like a 10950X, if that would be the model number, a Ryzen 9 10950X would have like 2 of these CCXs. So that would be, what, 24 cores? Yeah, that would be like a 24 core part. That would basically have the exact same core count as a Threadripper. The lowest end Threadripper has 24 cores. So it would be kind of like that, except your L3 cache would be divided. I feel like if AMD was going to do something like this and have multiple CCXs or multiple CCDs, they would need to probably do something like Intel has with Thread Director, because I don't know, maybe it doesn't matter because the L2 is the same for all the cores in terms of the size, or they could just do X3D on top of the compact cores. So, I don't know. All I'm saying is there's a lot of interesting things that I could see AMD doing with Zen 6 and Zen 7 with this design. So, I feel like both AMD and Intel are having to think outside the box more to get more core density per area, because Moore's Law has slowed down so much now, and the node shrinks. You can't really rely so heavily on node shrinks like you could before, because it's becoming increasingly more challenging to achieve the node shrink in the first place. So that's the reason why. And obviously it's really hard to do. Look at Intel. All the problems that they've been having over the years with trying to get their 10 nanometer, their 7 nanometer. I mean, we all know how long they were on 14 nanometer. So it's really hard to do. And TSMC, it's very, very hard. TSMC is even slowing down. So TSMC is really kind of the industry leader that's kind of the trailblazer at this point in trying to continue to get the node shrink and the greatest amount of area density scaling that you can get with these that allows these newer CPUs to exist. So yeah, it'll be interesting to see what sort of designs AMD and Intel come up with over the next couple of generations here, if core count numbers need to continue increasing for whatever reason. But looking at this, we can see that the Granite Ridge, basically Zen 5 system on a chip, has a lot of things in the Infinity Fabric, or in the I/O die. You can see you've got the DDR5 on the left, so you got the memory controller on the left. We have the Infinity Fabric itself in the middle. You have the integrated graphics with the display controller, and a lot of the other things that are in here are PCIe, USB, and some other things for like the debugging, the BIOS chip, system management unit. That thing will talk to the BIOS. So multimedia engine, VCN. This is the Radeon video codec next is what VCN is. That's basically how you live stream or encode video on a Ryzen CPU using a dedicated block, which is this multimedia engine. So basically all those people that always mention QuickSync in Intel CPUs, AMD has the same thing. Obviously it's not called QuickSync, it's their own VCN, but they have their own multimedia engine on these Ryzen CPUs, starting with Zen 4 desktop CPUs. So, in fact, there was a live stream I did, it was a while back, where I was using the Intel Arc GPU, but I forgot to set OBS to use the Intel QuickSync encoder on the GPU, and instead was actually live streaming the whole time using the Ryzen multimedia engine, this little thing right here. So, but yeah, I assume that the changes that they made to the actual I/O die involves the Infinity Fabric. Notice here there's a 28L in orange, PCIe 5.0 28L. That stands for 28 lanes. These are the lanes. These are the CPU lanes. So every time you guys see me draw those motherboard block diagrams, and I draw that line off to the left, well, guess what? That line off to the left is this orange part of the CPU. This orange part of the CPU connects to that long line that I always draw over to the left. In fact, there's two lines. 4 of these 28 connect to the chipset, and the other 24 lanes go out to graphics cards and PCIe slots and M.2 slots. So yeah, it all makes sense. This is probably my favorite slide out of their entire presentation, because this is the one that I can see myself drawing in the future in Paint if we have to talk about CPU design. So I actually like this one a lot, because this one clearly shows you that that not only is an AMD CPU a CPU, it's actually an SoC. Meaning this little thing in here, this little CPU right here, now I have to unbox the CPU. This thing right here, this is not only is it a CPU, it's actually an SoC. It's a system on a chip because it has a multimedia engine. It has USB ports. It has USB ports. Normally, a CPU does not have USB ports that connect directly to it. I'll give you guys an example. Intel CPUs have 0 USB ports connecting directly to the CPU. All USB ports on an Intel motherboard connect directly to the chipset, and then the chipset uplinks all of that to the CPU over the DMI lanes. So AMD is actually using an SoC design, which means they have native USB ports that connect directly into the CPU via the I/O die. This is a fundamental difference between an AMD CPU and an Intel CPU. So what are we asking? Did they have die-to-die Infinity Fabric before? Is that a new thing? I think that's the same. I don't think that's any different. Yeah, I don't think that's any different. Basically, that means that, well, die-to-die Infinity Fabric. No, that basically just means that everything's interconnected over the Infinity Fabric. That's what that means. But yeah, this is unique because it actually has USB ports natively. And you know what? A lot of motherboard manufacturers do. Not everybody does this, but some motherboards, some AM5 motherboards, connect the integrated audio. So, you know, the analog audio that you guys see on the back of a motherboard for your 3.5-inch audio jack, headphone jack, microphone jack, the 5.1 surround audio, also the optical audio, the SPDIF, the Toslink, all of those connectors on some, if not most, AM5 motherboards, the motherboard manufacturer connects the integrated audio directly into the CPU via a USB port on the SoC. And that's the reason why the integrated audio on a lot of AM5 motherboards is actually pretty good, believe it or not. It's actually pretty good. It's very low latency, and there's very low electrical noise because it's going straight to the CPU. It's not going through a chipset. It literally bypasses the entire chipset. So that's actually very good, because there are people I know in industry that do a lot of audio engineering work, and they typically only use Apple. A lot of people who do audio work will use an Apple-based system because Apple has an SoC similar to this Granite Ridge SoC, and the audio connects directly into the processor. So there's none of this like chipset electrical noise and all this stuff. So yeah, I mean, that's one of the reasons why the SoC has some advantages that you don't get otherwise. It says 4 display support on the left. Yes, that is correct. You can connect up to 4 monitors can be connected directly to the CPU. Asus boards come with Sonic audio control. Yeah, that just means that the audio chip that they're using uses that. What I'm talking about is that audio chip that Asus is using, they can connect it directly into the CPU over this I/O die, rather than connecting that into a chipset. Because the way that works on an Intel CPU is Asus has to take the Sonic audio, the Supreme FX chip, they have to connect that into the chipset, like a Z790 chipset. Then the chipset has to connect that to the CPU. So you have like an extra thing in the middle there that you don't have here. Now, having said that, not every motherboard does this. Some motherboards will still connect the audio chip into the chipset. They'll connect it into the X670 or the B650 chipset and then run that up to the CPU. So it really depends on the motherboard. But I will say, in general, it's better The audio quality will be better in terms of like it'll be less prone to electrical noise and interference if it connects directly to the SoC versus going through a chipset. That's one of the reasons why people use Apple for audio, for sound engineering. It's because of this behavior. So what that means, that implies that the AMD SoC can be used similar to an Apple-based system for audio editing, for professional audio work. I mean, you can do it on any random desktop. It's just like there may be some instances where certain motherboards have noise in the background that can be annoying, like electrical noise, for instance, like signaling noise. But yeah, you can run 4 monitors off of this, provided the motherboard enables you to do so. Like, I know in the case of the Aorus Master, the Aorus Master has, I think, 1, 2, 3. Yeah, so the Gigabyte X670E Aorus Master allows you to drive 3 out of the 4 displays directly off the SoCs. You have HDMI, you have DisplayPort, then you have DisplayPort alt mode over this 10 gigabit USB-C port. So that's 3 monitors off of a Aorus Master from Gigabyte. And you know why they're able to do that? Literally because of what we were just looking at. Because of the display controller. Basically, the Aorus Master enabled 3 out of the 4 ports. The 4th one is left hanging. It's an open circuit. They didn't terminate it anywhere. That's the cool thing about the SoC. Yeah, it also lists all the capability right here. 4 simultaneous display streams. 1 USB 2. 1 USB 3.2 Gen 2 Type A. 3 USB 3.3 Type C. So those are 5 native USB ports on the chipset itself. Or not the chipset, on the I/O die. Do you advise G-Skill Flare X for my 5000 series CPU? You can get it, although it doesn't make the biggest difference anymore. With Zen 3 is so good that any random DDR5 memory works, or DDR4 memory works fine. I used the G-Skill Flare X with Zen 1 and Zen 2, and then when it came to Zen 3, I stopped using it. I upgraded to a higher capacity. But yeah, you can do that if you want. It's not gonna. It's good. I mean, yeah, DDR4 is so cheap now, but that's the thing. Yeah. The other thing too is the DDR5 is rated for 5600 mega transfers instead of 5200 mega transfers. So that's pretty much the main thing I wanted to look at. I really wanted to look at this because this kind of shows what is actually inside the I/O die. Tech Power Up wrote a very good article years ago, actually, that showed that chipset. I use that for reference when I did a lot of my block diagram videos early on. But let's talk about, I don't know, do we want to talk about Intel now, or do we want to talk about AMD still? Because the only other thing to talk about is the delay. So I think everybody watching is aware that they delayed the launch by like 2 weeks now, or like 1 week. Okay, depends on the SKU. So Ryzen 7 9700X and Ryzen 5 9600X will now go on sale on August 8th. So that's literally a week after the initial launch, or the original launch date. And then the Ryzen 9 processors will go on sale on August 15th. So that's like 2 weeks after the initial launch was supposed to happen. We pride ourselves in providing a high quality experience. I can't think of like why they had to delay this. There's 2 theories. there's two theories that I think kind of why they would do this. One, what I imagine, one of the things could be something simple, like they made Ryzen 7 boxes, but they accidentally put Ryzen 9 CPUs in the Ryzen 7 boxes, or it could be anything, like they put Ryzen 5 CPUs in Ryzen 9 boxes, so they're like mislabeled. You know, that could be a problem. That could be a thing, like they went through QC, but obviously they're labeled wrong. Another thing that could be wrong would be, like, for example, if AMD has like a 12-point checklist for testing every single one of these CPUs, but for some reason the first one or two batches went through the QA and only had like 7 out of the 12 checks done, and because they didn't turn on the other, you know, whatever the QA process entails, like maybe they didn't fully QA test certain CPUs and they just wanted to make sure, you know, especially because of all the stuff that's been happening with Intel recently, they don't want themselves to be in that boat. But I don't think, like, it can't be anything serious though, because there's no way that a real serious problem would cause a 1 to 2 week delay. A real serious problem, like what's happening with Intel, that would cause several months worth of delay. You know, that's the sort of thing that would delay things until October. So, it's not that serious. But it is something that makes you wonder, like, wow, it just so happens that neither company seems to be able to do things 100% properly these days, which is really weird. Yeah. I've also read that some people were saying that, oh, it's because Intel is doing a microcode fix. We don't know when Intel's going to release that microcode fix. That's the problem. So I don't think it has anything to do with that. Because I remember I read some comments, people were saying that, oh, AMD's delaying it because Intel has to release a microcode fix. That has nothing to do with it, because first of all, we've already seen a lot of the leaked benchmarks, and if any of those are remotely true, it basically means Zen 5 is already faster than all the other CPUs that currently exist, and that includes Intel CPUs. So there's no reason to delay the launch if they just want Intel to look even worse, because it doesn't really matter. You know, like, I don't see why that would be a valid reason to delay the CPUs. They forgot to put the Ryzen stickers in the box. You know, that would be a funny reason. Like, if the reason was because they forgot to put the little Ryzen sticker in the box, that would be hilarious if that was actually the reason. I don't think that would be the reason to delay it though, Marcelo, because I think what they would do, if that's literally the reason, what they would probably do is they would just ship these stickers, like in a big thing of stickers. Like, they would just ship all that to the retailers, and the retailer would just hand those out. Or like if it was Newegg or Amazon, they would just put the sticker in the shipping box with the processor. So I don't think that would be the reason for the delay. I think it has to be something more serious, like they literally put the wrong CPU in the wrong box. Like they put a Ryzen 9 in a Ryzen 7 labeled box. Something like that makes a lot of sense. Like QA screwed up somewhere in packaging the initial batches and the CPUs are in the wrong boxes or something like that. That could be an obvious one. It can't be anything serious, because there's no way that you're gonna fix a serious problem in like 1 or 2 weeks. So, what do you think about Intel's new chiplet design? We will be talking about the Intel one as we get closer to the Intel launch. What I can say right now is Intel, most likely the problem that Intel is running into with Raptor Lake will not exist in the same capacity on Arrow Lake. Now, it could still happen, but by the time the thing is, Intel knows about the problem now. It's well understood, at least internally within Intel. So if they have the same problem with stuff like oxidation on the silicon vias, and if that was also affecting Arrow Lake, they will have caught that and they will fix that so that by the time Intel's Arrow Lake launches, I don't think the general public will see that problem if it in fact exists on the new CPUs, if that makes sense. So I don't expect the new Intel CPUs to have the same problem as the current CPUs. But yeah, like Capono's saying, the trust is still broken though. Yeah, there's gonna be a lot of people that will either try AMD, or what they'll do is they'll just stay on their older Intel CPU. And they just won't upgrade for a longer time. Keep in mind, like I said, a lot of people, they upgrade on a 3, 5, or 7 year life cycle. So if somebody is on a Alder Lake i7, like this 12700K right here, like if someone's on one of these, they're probably just going to keep using this for another 3 years. You know what I'm saying? Like, think about it. This CPU will be 3 years old in November. So if they go another 3 years, guess what? That's 6 years. Or they might do another 2 years. And at that point, they'll be on the 5-year cycle. So they'll be in the same boat as somebody who today has a 3800X and is considering getting a 9700X. What's the pros and cons Intel and AMD for you? The pros and cons, that is a really good question. You know, at the end of the day, they're very similar. So, like, if I were using, if you were given a PC to test, but you were not told the specs, and you weren't, like, you couldn't open up Task Manager or run something like CPU-Z to look at what the CPU is, and you could only, like, do a blind test, for example. If you're just doing a blind test, and we're talking, like, it could be any current generation Ryzen 9 or Intel i9, like, you would be hard-pressed to tell the difference. So the pros and cons, in terms of a general use experience, they're exactly the same. Like, you won't actually notice a difference between one or the other. In terms of the value, I do think AMD offers better value in terms of typically you get more PCIe lanes that are of a higher or a newer generation versus Intel. Intel tends to be on the older stuff, although it wasn't always that way. There was a time back in the bulldozer days where Intel was on PCI Gen 3, for example, and AMD was still on PCI Gen 2. It was like that all the way until Ryzen came out. Then when Ryzen came out, AMD was finally on PCI Gen 3 on desktop. And then AMD kind of surpassed Intel because AMD then went to PCI Gen 4 with Zen 2. That was like 2019. Intel didn't get PCI Gen 4 on desktop for a whole 2 years later with Rocket Lake 11th Gen. And that was after Zen 3. A lot of people seem to forget that the 11th Gen Intel is actually newer than the Zen 3 Ryzen 5000 series. The Ryzen 5000 series is actually pretty old at this point, and yet they're still selling in stores everywhere. But that's because those were like PCI Gen 4 from like way back, as far back as like Ryzen 3000. But then Intel did launch PCI Gen 5 for the graphics card slot, mind you. Only the graphics card slot with Alder Lake, with the Z690. But you couldn't do like Gen 5 storage until obviously Gen 5 drive starts showing up. And I know people will say like Gen 5 storage doesn't really do much compared to Gen 4. Yeah, in most everyday use cases that's true. But we're talking like industry trends, right? So they kind of go back and forth in terms of like who's first to market with next generation industry standard stuff. So some people will point out like, okay, AMD brought Wi-Fi 6E with AM5, but then Intel brought Wi-Fi 7 with the 14th gen, although Threadripper also had Wi-Fi 7, so they're kind of the same there. Although Threadripper is super expensive and it's very, very niche, so it doesn't really count, but it's there. So in terms of technology, I would say they're both pretty much the same at this point. It's really going to come down to which one performs better for what you do. And at the end of the day, AMD uses less power and generates less heat in the room, so it's a more pleasant experience overall to be in the room, especially if you're live streaming for a long period of time. It's nice to know that the CPU is not going to heat up the room. And if you're also playing a game while live streaming, that uses the computer even more. So, you know, there's stuff like that. You just don't want a CPU that draws 300 watts. Yeah, the energy efficiency thing, I would say AMD right now definitely is the leader when it comes to energy efficiency. But that wasn't always the case. It kind of goes back and forth. Back when AMD's Bulldozer was the AMD CPU, Intel was more energy efficient with Sandy Bridge. So AMD is the king of efficiency right now, but keep in mind, it's not always the same. Like, time doesn't stand still. Today, AMD is the king of efficiency. But Intel's not going to sit around and just let them, you know, walk all over the place. And the reality is, I will say this. When AMD is ahead of Intel, I think overall the industry seems to trend in a better direction compared to when Intel is leading and AMD is trying to play catch-up. Because think about how things were when AMD was trying to play catch-up. If you guys remember the last decade where AMD had Bulldozer and Piledriver and Steamroller, and Intel had Sandy Bridge, Ivy Bridge, Haswell, Broadwell, Skylake, Kaby Lake, and then Ryzen came out. So Intel had all these like copy-paste quad-core CPUs every year. So we had stagnation during that time. So when Intel leads, I feel like the industry kind of stagnates. When AMD leads, the industry kind of moves at a very fast pace, if that makes sense. And that's because the underdog, AMD has always been the underdog. And this is the thing I want you guys to understand. Even when AMD's winning, they're not actually winning. Keep that in mind. Let that reality sink in. Even when AMD is winning, even when AMD is the efficiency king, their CPUs are objectively better and more reliable, they still have far less market share than Intel, and the general public still knows nothing about them. So on the flip side, so that's what it's like when AMD is actually objectively winning. Now let's talk about when Intel's winning. So when Intel's winning, people still don't know who AMD is, because why would they? And you get nothing different, if that makes sense. Like you basically have the same CPU over and over again. And the status quo is maintained, and that's just how things are. So, I mean, that's a weird thing to think about when you think about the CPU industry as a whole. And that's the reason why this thing with Qualcomm, launching Snapdragon X Elite into the Windows laptop space is such a huge deal. It's such a big deal because you guys don't understand it right now. You don't see the big picture, or at least I think the typical tech enthusiast who only focuses on desktop PCs from AMD Ryzen or Intel Core, they fail to see the big picture, the long-term trajectory that the industry is headed in. Because the Qualcomm coming into the Windows market, that would be almost like if Apple decided to go into the Windows market. Like if Apple decided to say, hey Microsoft, I know we had a lot of bad blood in the past, but can we like make Windows work natively on our M4 Max. Can you imagine what would happen? Like, that would open the floodgates. That would literally that's like the Darkling from Shadow and Bone summoning the Fold. Like, that's basically what that is. And if people didn't understand that reference, don't even worry about it. It doesn't even matter. But that's basically what would happen if Apple decided to bring their M4 Max to Windows. That's like goodbye AMD, goodbye Intel. Because the moment Apple starts like partnering with Microsoft to make their ARM-based CPUs work in Windows, that is like the beginning of the end for AMD and Intel and x86 as we know it. Because that's... I don't even want to think about that. But the reality is currently today, Apple's single thread performance is king. Like, if you guys, if people who think, oh, AMD and Intel go back and forth with like single thread, multi-thread, but the reality is Apple's single thread is so much better than both of them. It isn't even a fair contest. So, and Qualcomm's really the one that's going to shake things up, I feel, in the long run. It doesn't look like it now, but only time will tell what will happen. But I know that, like, Apple, their CPU is very good, and a lot of the stuff that I expect us to see from Intel's Lunar Lake in the laptop market is almost like a copy of what Apple has done with their ARM architecture. Only this time it's Intel basically almost mimicking Apple to a lesser degree, except Intel's building an x86 based CPU, whereas Apple has an ARM based CPU. So that will be interesting. That will be interesting. Your last AMD CPU was 2001 or 2002 with the release 64-bit. Was 64-bit really that early? I think 64-bit was more what came a little bit later, didn't it? With Windows XP. Wasn't that like 2003, 2004? Or 2005? I can't remember exactly. Mac Air doesn't have a fan. Impressive. Yeah, I know. And it also has the best single thread performance. ARM holdings are already rubbing their hands in anticipation of AMD Intel entering the ARM market. Yeah, Marcelo, I think, yeah, I would not be surprised. I would not be surprised if somewhere in AMD and Intel, there's like a secret division. There's like a secret, top secret team that is secretly working on an ARM-based CPU. So, do you guys remember K12? Does anybody remember K12? Does anyone remember this? AMD is planning to make ARM CPUs. Oh, wait, hold on. Wait a minute. No, that's not it. Jim Keller. No, not this. It was a while back. Yeah, 2014. AMD today announced a roadmap of near and mid-term computing solutions. Remember, this is from 2014. So somewhere in here, where is it? Okay, look, check this out. Check this out. First, 28 nanometer 64-bit ARM server CPU. They remember when they were wanting to make, right here, I remember this, x86 and ARM. Design framework within AMD SoCs enables interchangeable x86 and ARM CPU complexes, achieves pin-compatible 64-bit ARM and x86 compute. So AMD has already gone down this road once upon a time. About 10 years ago, they actually had two teams. One was working on Zen, which was the x86 one here, and then the other one was working on ARM, which they were basically like sister projects or sister CPUs that were being developed in parallel. Ultimately, I think I forget what the reason was why they didn't do the ARM one. I think it was funding. I think AMD was, you guys have to remember, from like 2012 to 2019, AMD was bleeding money almost every quarter. And the projection, like the industry was predicting that AMD would go bankrupt by 2019 and be out of the industry. Like they'd be out of business by the end of the decade. That is what a lot of investors were saying. Not investors, a lot of industry analysts were saying that AMD would cease to exist by 2019. They'd literally run out of money. They'd file for like Chapter 11 or whatever, and they'd go bankrupt, and that would be the end of them. I remember in 2016 or somewhere around there, there was like a rumor that Samsung was going to buy AMD or something like that, and then it never happened. It was like a rumor. But then we all know the story, right? Like Ryzen came out 2017. It was good value. It was like the best value for the money. Nowhere else could you get an 8-core CPU for less than $1,000 at the time. So, yeah, this was the big deal. This was a big deal when it came out. But anyway, that was kind of history, right? Like they wanted to make ARM. AMD K12. All I remember was K12 was the code name. Because all their CPUs until Bulldozer were like K series. Because there was K5, K6, K7, K8. I remember, I think K8 was the famous one. K10 was also really good. I forget which one my first CPU was. It was either a K8 or a K10. Or something like that. I forget what the K11 was. And then K12 was basically the secret like ARM based project that never really panned out. So yeah, that's history there though. Project Skybridge. Yeah, that was the Project Skybridge was basically Zen, I think. Or no, that was not Zen. That was the server ARM chip. K12, a new high performance low power ARM based core that takes deep advantage of AMD's ARM architectural license, extensive 64-bit expertise. Development team led by Chief CPU Architect Jim Keller. The first products based on K12 are planned for introduction in 2016. Well, that never actually happened. Because they had to go all in on the Zen CPUs. This makes me wonder, like about... Around this time was Intel... Devil's Canyon, I think 4790K, and the Z97 was the CPU around this time when this article was written. Yeah, this was the Haswell era. This was Haswell era. Intel was when this was going on. Why is ARM more advanced? I don't get the... ARM is basically like the low power version of x86. Although that is way oversimplifying it. Let's put it this way. ARM was designed to run on the lowest amount of energy possible. Like, trying to squeeze out the most amount of battery life. It was literally designed initially for mobile, for battery power. It was never designed to be plugged into a wall and have unlimited power. Like x86. And that's the reason why they're so fundamentally different. x86 was never designed for laptops. It was never designed for battery. It was designed to be plugged into a wall. So it's quite impressive when you think about the fact that laptops that are x86 based, the fact that they have the battery power that they have, or the battery life that they have, is quite impressive. But when you compare it to ARM, when you compare it to the battery life on an ARM-based CPU, it looks terrible. So, ARM has always been more efficient. And if you can combine that efficiency with very high throughput, like high single thread, high multi-thread, that's the end of x86. And the only thing then is native application support. The moment applications can natively run on ARM-based architectures, that's the end. Like, why would anybody want to use x86 at that point? Like, why would you want to do that? Because I would rather run an ARM-based CPU, even if it's in a desktop, if it means my desktop never makes any noise, if the fans don't spin above like 500 RPM, and the power draw from the wall doesn't exceed 60 watts for the entire system. So, can you imagine the difference in terms of energy efficiency? And assuming it performs the same as x86, but it uses so much less power. Because you know how everyone's like, oh, AMD Ryzen is the king of efficiency. Intel can pull like 300, 350 watts. The AMD CPU is pulling like 170 watts. And that's if you're running the super high-end 16-core. If you're running an 8-core, it doesn't even use half that. You know what I'm saying? So like, but the thing is, it's like, oh, it looks so amazing because Intel's efficiency is so bad. But as soon as you compare that to ARM, it's like, is it really that impressive? I don't think so. So that's the reason why ARM, and the other thing too is Windows. It's all about, so, you know, we're looking at it as consumers. But what we don't realize is it's all about what Microsoft wants. Microsoft actually wants to go to ARM. This is the reality. Microsoft would prefer if Windows and the entire ecosystem was all ARM native, like Apple. They would rather it be that way. So keep that in mind. So if the industry, if Microsoft themselves want to go to ARM, you can imagine that on the software development side, that means that they're going to have all these job listings for ARM developer this, ARM senior architect with experience doing ARM-based programming, ARM application development, blah, blah, blah. Scrum Master for ARM that has worked on ARM-based projects in the past. You know, like, that's what the industry is going to be looking for. That is what's going to become in demand from a job standpoint. So, knowing this, there's no way that AMD and Intel are not investigating the possibility of creating an ARM-based desktop CPU. So keep that in mind, guys. I'll leave it at that. And we already know about the whole thing with NVIDIA and the potential for NVIDIA releasing an ARM-based CPU in the future. So that's just going to create more headaches for Intel. Like, first of all, it's going to be harder for AMD to continue staying relevant because they're already the underdog. Even if, remember what I told you guys a few minutes ago, even when AMD is winning, Intel still is the dominant player in terms of market share, in terms of mind share, in terms of visibility in the public space. So as soon as you add ARM competitors like Qualcomm, NVIDIA, heck, let's throw Apple in there too while we're at it. You know, as soon as you add all these other guys in there, and Samsung, Exynos, whatever, like if they ever want to be a serious contender, that just makes it even harder because that dilutes the market even more. So yes, it's a huge headache for Intel having to compete with all these guys all of a sudden, but they're in a better, at the end of the day, Intel's in a better position to compete against all these guys compared to AMD because Intel still has the public support, I guess. Like, you still have all these people who don't even know that AMD exists, so they're just gonna, like, you tell them, like, hey, you're, you know, like 14900K has problems, and they might have bought one, and they're salty that it has issues if they RMA it, but you know what they're gonna think? Are they gonna think about switching to AMD? No. They're gonna be like, well, I'm just gonna downgrade to a 14700K or a 13700K, and I'll use that for the next 5 years, and then hopefully Intel will have fixed it. And then Intel can save us. They can save me with the newer CPU in the future. That's what most people are gonna do, man. Like most people that are suffering from the Intel issue, like if it's a regular consumer, they're not really switching to AMD unless they feel like Intel really was bad, you know, like, and I think not everybody's gonna have that opinion. I think most people are they don't know any better. They don't know that there is another option. They're just gonna stick with Intel, even though they have a problem with the CPU. You have a 13900K with 0 issues, and you will switch to AMD. So you're really gonna switch to AMD. Patiently waiting for 9950X 3D. Won't touch Intel with a 10-foot pole at the moment. Yeah, Intel has some serious problems. I don't know what Intel's gonna do, guys. Like, they said microcode update. I don't think a microcode update can fix that. If they do a microcode update that causes the voltages to be significantly lower, that means that Intel's multi-thread performance is going to drop so much. Like, it's gonna be a huge downgrade in multi-thread. Single thread for Intel will not change much. So basically what I expect to see happen next month with Intel is they're going to release a BIOS update, new baseline profile, and what it does is it will limit the current draw, and it'll probably lower the voltage mildly. But what that will do, that will make the multi-thread performance drop a noticeable amount. But the single thread performance won't actually change that much. So that's the reason why I don't think AMD's delaying the launch because of Intel. I don't think that's what they're doing. There's somebody somewhere put the wrong CPUs in the wrong boxes. I bet somebody took like Ryzen 9s and put them in Ryzen 7 boxes. It's probably mislabeled. There's a batch or two that are like mislabeled, and they have to pull them back so that people don't feel like, hey, I bought a Ryzen 7, but it came in a Ryzen 9 box, or I bought a Ryzen 9, but it came in a Ryzen 7 box. Like, it's probably something simple like that. Otherwise, it wouldn't be like 1-2 weeks. It would be like months if it was a serious problem, if it was delayed for any reason. You play PUBG, and Intel has a big problem in that game. To begin with, I can't imagine dealing with water cooling stuff or wait for water blocks. I buy a CPU on day one. When you buy a CPU on day one, you want to use it on day one. With AMD, I just snap a D15 and that's it. Yeah, that is true. Yeah, that's true, man. I agree. You don't have to see, you know, like, now you got me worried, man. Because I've got one of these. I got one of these big i9s, these power-hungry i9s over here. Now, we're not streaming on it because I don't trust it. I'm not going to stream on that. We're definitely streaming on the AMD. We're streaming on the AMD right now. Like, this is what we're using. Like, when it comes to real, actual stuff that needs to be reliable, this is what I use. But I'm telling you, I have another, it's like a server. I have a server that runs on a 13900K. And you know what I'm using to cool the 1300K? An ancient Noctua NHD14. I'm using an air cooler from 12 years ago on a 1300K. And let me tell you, it does not cool it properly. This thing regularly can hit 100 degrees Celsius. So I am concerned that at some point, this CPU that I have now, knock on wood, I don't want to have to deal with an RMA, but I'm using an air cooler on a 13900K, and I've been using it like that since day one. since since October of 2022. It's almost been 2 years. The 13900K is sitting under a Noctua D14, not even a D15, a D14 for almost 2 years. No contact frame, because that's a waste of money. There's none of that stuff. It's there with the most cheap ghetto thermal paste that's like $1 thermal paste, like toothpaste. And that's literally on there. And the thing runs up to 100 degrees Celsius. It's boiling water. The 13900K is boiling water. So I don't know, man. Talking about liquid cooling, and I'm like, I have a liquid cooling. I have a 360 millimeter radiator. You know what I use it with? A 7800X3D. So my big deep cool LT720. The big deep cool LT720 is being used with a 7800X3D. Meanwhile, we have a 13900K running 100 degrees Celsius with a big Noctua D14 from 12 years ago with toothpaste, thermal paste. Yeah, man. See, and I'm thinking like I shouldn't have to put a liquid cooler on the CPU. If Intel's gonna fail, that's on them. I'm just going to have to do the RMA. That's my philosophy. That's my way of looking at it. So that's how it is. I'm not going to waste my time taking that Noctua off that Intel CPU. The other thing too is you know how the Intel here, let's get this 12700K out of the box. So well, hold on. We can just go from here. Yeah. So you guys know how the Intel CPU has this wobbly frame? You know how the frame thing wobbles on Intel? It doesn't wobble on AMD, but it wobbles on the Intel. So the sides here, where you have these flaps that stick out on the edge, these things tend to become concave over time, which makes the IHS become deformed over time. Noctua has done a lot of extensive research on this subject, and they have found that the IHS on the Intel is very flimsy. Like it gives way over time, and that can impact the cooling. So the fact that I have had an i9 being pressed on by a D14 air cooler, running at stock settings for almost 2 years, I don't even want to try to run Cinebench on that thing. You know what I'm saying? I don't want to run Cinebench on that thing. I don't want to discover that, oh, I have to actually RMA this thing. I'm serious. Like that's literally how I have the 1300K set up. I'm using it with an air cooler. The air cooler is super old, and I'm using it with the cheapest thermal paste imaginable. But see, like, hey, you know what I'm saying? Guess what? We're using the exact same cheap thermal paste with the AMD Ryzen, and we don't have any problems. So if Ryzen can take it, Intel should be able to take it. That's how I see it. If this guy can handle air cooling and cheap thermal paste that doesn't do anything, and it can survive and it's not overheating, then Intel should be able to survive and be tough. Toughen up. That's all I'm going to say. The i9 needs to toughen up and get its act together. Boot some Dragon's Dogma 2. I'm scared to try playing. You know why? You know why? Because Dragon's Dogma 2 has to compile shaders. It's the shader compiling that has got me a little concerned. Because you guys know, I've said in the past, I don't use the i9 for gaming. because, well, I mean, it wasn't for this reason, but now I guess this might be one of the reasons not to use it for gaming. The i9 is the lean meat grilling machine. Yeah. Hold on. Where's the, hold up. Where's the 7950X? Because this is what we are live streaming on this CPU right now. And I've never had a problem. No blue screen, no instability. I can turn on whatever game. I can compile shaders while streaming, while doing all this stuff. And it works. It's never let me down. 100% rock stable. We're running 96 gigabytes of DDR5 at 6400. We've basically been running it like that for over a year with only moderate BIOS updates. One thing I do like on Tech Power Up, I like how Tech Power Up has the Intel. I really wish they had like the AMD die shot on the website here. I mean, one thing that they do is they show you the chipset, which is really good. You can see all the chipset lanes. I really wish they had like a die shot. I guess that's more of an AMD not providing one compared to Intel. But yeah, there is a company, I forget what the company is. There's a company in China that is making, they have a license for Zen 1 based CPUs. But I think, if I remember correctly, there was another company, I don't know if it's the same company in China or if it's a different one, but there was a company that was, they're licensed to manufacture Zen 1 based CPUs with their own branding. But I think they stick the Intel IHS on top of the Zen 1 CPU. If I'm not mistaken, I think that's how they do it. Maybe I'm wrong on that, but I remember there was like a Chinese company that made CPUs, but they use the Intel IHS. So it literally looks like an Intel. It looks just like this, but underneath it, it's a Zen 1 based architecture. That is hilarious. That is basically like you took like the worst DDR4 controller and the worst IHS design and combined them together. That's wonderful. If that's what they did. But what's funny is I remember when a lot of people were criticizing the IHS for the AM5 CPUs, like this thing being too thick. It was too thick. But when Noctua did their test, it doesn't flex. So it's like it doesn't give way over time the way the Intel one does. So you know how the Intel one has a problem where it becomes concave? The AMD one is tough. It doesn't, it's very durable, man. It does not give way. So you don't have to worry about it changing over time in terms of how the thermal face, how the interface between the cooler and the IHS is affected due to long-term pressure. So, although I think AMD did make adjustments to the Zen 5 IHS, so they may have thinned it out and made the Zen 5 die taller or something. So we'll see, because they did say that I think it's like a 7-degree drop at the same TDP with the new Zen 5. Actually building 7950X system. Yeah. No, yeah, it is. We're running it right now. Yeah, we're running 96 gigs. Hold on, what do we do here? There it is. There it is, guys. AMD Ryzen 9 7950X 16 core CPU. And then we go to the memory tab right here. Memory, 96 gigabytes. Check it out, 6400 2 out of 4 DIMMs right there. $96 gigs. Hold on, where's the... There it is. Why did I... Oh, it's going to be hard to redo this because it's all gigantic now. What did I do? How did I move it around? Oh, I guess it's just too big. 56 gigabyte cached. Yeah, that's because I never turn off my computer. Well, that's because I never shut down my computer, I should say. Yeah. Yeah, man, that's the way to go. Like, the thing is, you can do 4 sticks, but you can't do 4 sticks above. So, like, I've shown how to do 192 gigs of RAM. So, like, I have 2 of these kits. So I could do 192 gigs. But I put the other... So here's the thing. Like, I got one kit with the 7950X. The other kit is with the 79... Actually, where is the other kit? Because it's not with the 7950X 3D anymore. It was. Oh, you know what? Where my other kit of the same memory is? 13900K has the other 96 gigs. That's right. Okay, so my 13900K has the other 96 gigs. The 7950X has this 96 gigs. But I was testing 192 for a while, and I can get it to run 6000, but the problem with running it at 6000 across all 4 DIMMs is memory context restore doesn't work. Like, meaning it has to retrain memory like twice a week. It's super annoying. If you put the computer to sleep like I do, it's never a problem because it goes to sleep, it wakes up, it goes to sleep, it wakes up, and it's like you're never, unless you're rebooting your computer for a Windows update, or you just shut down your computer when you're done using it. Like, then the problem is training 192 gigs of RAM takes a long time. Just like I showed in the video when I showed 192. But what I will say is, if somebody cares more about capacity compared to memory speed, then you can run 4800 or even maybe 5000 or 5200 for 192 gigs, totally stable. Now, where it gets kind of flaky is when you start going above that number. Like, if you try to do 5600, you're going to have to mess with the impedance values. If you're trying 6000, you're definitely going to have to mess with the impedance values. But I don't fully trust 6000. It's very hit or miss. It's going to depend on a lot of things. It's going to depend on the motherboard. It's going to depend on the IMC of the CPU. But in general, like, I can do 8000 easily with 2 single rank DIMMs. So going back to the X3D, right? Like, I mentioned my X3D. X3D, I'm using 48 gigs at 8000 DDR5 on a ASRock Steel Legend, and that works fine. So yeah, that I was thinking, like, where did I put my other RAM? The RAM is with the i9. That's where it's at. So anyway, so yeah, all of this stuff has been working perfectly for over a year now. The 96 gigs, 6400, 16 core, all big cores, no little cores. So very, very good overall. All right, thanks for stopping by. Yeah, glad it was useful info. Yeah, so we will be covering the 9700X at launch. Now, the question remains whether or not I will review the 9950X. The 9950X is interesting. I don't think it's as interesting as the 9700X, though. Because to me, I feel like it's 170 watt. So yes, it's faster than Zen 4. But is it really going to be that much faster? We'll see. I would still like to test one. So we'll see if I do a full review on the 16 core. But I do think, like, if I do get a 9950X, that will be what replaces this CPU. Super helpful. 2x48 is the goal. Yeah, in general, the lower amount of memory, the faster it is at training. Yes, that's true. But two DIMMs is not that long though. 2 sticks is not that bad. Like even 96 gigs, like this configuration, the memory training is not terrible. It's not anything like it was a year ago or a year and a half ago. So like even if I have to do memory training with this configuration, we're looking at like half a minute to 45 seconds to train 96 gigs of memory. So it's not that bad. Now, 4 sticks is where it takes a while. Like if you're doing 128 gigs, 192 gigs of RAM, yeah, then it takes a while to train. Once you get it running though, at like let's say you're doing 192 at 4800 megahertz or 4800 megatransfers, the initial training takes a while, but after that, like MCR takes care of it. So it's like not that bad. But still, I would only recommend 4 sticks of memory if you actually need that memory. And the way I calculate it is relatively simple. Now I gotta fix my paint thing here because where's paint? So I'll tell you guys like how I build PCs, and you guys can decide if that's what you want to follow. Wait, what happened here? Why is this cut off? I follow Adobe's guidelines for building content creator workstations. And essentially, there's a rule. I guess we'll remove the old PC. So this is not me making this up. This is actually Adobe's guideline for productivity. So this is what they say. This is the rule. If you're new to building a PC and you want to know like how much RAM do I need, what kind of like GPU do I need, it all depends on your CPU. It all starts with the CPU. That is the reason why the CPU decision is probably the single most important decision besides like what motherboard and power supply, because GPU, whatever, you can change that over the years. It doesn't really matter. Like the CPU though, you're kind of stuck with the motherboard and the CPU for a while. So it's the more challenging thing to swap out, because you basically have to do a full new rebuild. So the rule of thumb is for every, so okay, if you want to know how much RAM depends on the CPU core. So system RAM, so this is not VRAM, system RAM equals 4 gigabyte per CPU core. So this is the rule of thumb when building a balanced system that's not going to have any resource contention or resource utilization issues over the lifespan of that machine. So for every core, you should give the PC 4 gigabytes of system memory. So that means if I have a 16 core, so for example, if I have, so here's some examples. 8 core equals or implies I need 32 gigabytes of RAM. Does that make sense? Because we're doing 4 gigabytes of RAM per every core. If we have 8 cores, it's 8 times 4. That equals 32 gigabytes of RAM. So this is the reason why what you will see if you watch all these tech tubers showing like build videos with a 7800X3D, for example, notice how all the test systems have 32 gigs of RAM. 8 core equals 32 gigs of RAM. If we go up, if we go 12 core, 12 core CPUs should have minimum 48 gigs of RAM. This is to reduce contention of resources between cores. Anytime the cores have to go to memory, you want them to have their own kind of memory bank, so to speak. So it's like you don't want like multiple cores trying to contest for the same RAM capacity or the same chunk of RAM or chunk of system memory for use. This is the reason why Adobe specifies these guidelines. Like if you're building a Premiere workstation for editing, for example, this is how you build your PC to these standards so that you don't have resource utilization issues when you're doing work. And it just goes up from there. 16 core implies 64 gigs of RAM. Now, you don't have to do this, or you could go like more, or you could go less. In general, I would say these numbers are recommended for these CPUs. So if you have a 6-core CPU, you know, that would be less. That would be like 24 gigs of RAM. So what's interesting is with DDR5, you can buy a single 24 gig DIMM and pair that up with a 6-core CPU. And DDR5, remember what I said earlier at the beginning of the stream? I said 2 sticks of DDR5 is kind of like 4 sticks of DDR4. And so if you have a 6-core, like if, for example, if I have a 7600 or a 9600X, a 6-core Zen 5 CPU, the minimum amount of RAM would be like 24 gigs of RAM. So I could actually build a relatively decent budget PC with a 9600X and a single stick of 24 gigs of RAM. Now I could go single stick 32 gigs of RAM or 2x16 or whatever. That is an option. But remember what I said earlier. 2 sticks of DDR5 is kind of like 1 stick, or 2 sticks of DDR5 is kind of like 4 sticks of DDR4. That means if I have 1 stick of DDR5, that's still kind of like having 2 sticks of DDR4. So running a single stick of DDR5 is not as bad as 1 single channel stick of DDR4. So that's why the numbers make sense. So now we keep going up. Now we go to a 24 core. 24 core should be 96 gigs of RAM. And this is the reason why when I built my Threadripper last year that I did a live stream build on, you guys saw me building my Threadripper is a 24 core CPU. It's a 7960X. So the minimum amount of RAM that I want to pair with that is 96. And you guys know what I put in there, 128 gigs of RAM. So, and that's 4 sticks of RAM. And it's 4 channels, so it's easier to do. It's no harder to do that on Threadripper than like 2 sticks of DDR5 on a regular Ryzen. So this is kind of the way to think about building PCs. That's the reason why the higher up you go in terms of the CPU, like if you go to a Ryzen 9, for example, your recommended required RAM is going to be higher. So this is the reason why the CPU dictates how expensive the overall build will ultimately be in terms of price point, because you're not going to buy, if you buy a 16-core 7950X3D and you pair that up with 32 gigs of RAM, there is potential for memory issues in terms of applications and cores contesting over RAM sectors, and that's the reason why Adobe doesn't want you doing that, and that's the reason why if you're going to build a Ryzen 9 flagship, you would want 64 gigs of RAM minimum. And that's the reason why I've always built my PCs the way I do, and that's probably one of the reasons why I never have issues with poor performance or games running out of memory or, you know, like these type of problems so that people run into. But yeah, that's the reason why for most gaming desktops, you'll see like, okay, the people will say, oh, you don't need more than 8 cores. But then when you look at what memory amount they're always recommending, everyone's saying 32 gigs of RAM is enough. Well, I don't know if they actually are aware of this, but saying that blindly, it just so happens that it's dumb luck that that statement is true. It's weird, but it actually, it's true. So yeah, you had me thinking you only need that because of the 4090. Okay, so okay, that's an excellent segue, Jeb. So I appreciate the super chat. So you're saying screenshot for build guide. Okay, that's fine. I'm going to add the VRAM too. We're about to talk about VRAM because this also applies to the graphics card. So the graphics card, so VRAM equals 1 gigabyte per CPU core. So this is the rule of thumb for the GPU. So for RAM, 4 gigs of RAM per core. With VRAM, it's 1 gigabyte of VRAM per CPU core. So this is much easier to remember because if you have a 6 core, that implies the minimum amount of VRAM should be 6 gigs of VRAM. If you have an 8 core, the minimum amount, remember these are minimum amounts, which means you could pair a 4090 with a 7800X3D, and yeah, it's got way more VRAM than the cores actually need based off of the mathematics, but it's okay. It's not a problem to over spec, but it can be a problem to under spec. So think of these as kind of the minimums. So 8 gig VRAM, and I probably need to move this over here. I probably need to get rid of some of that stuff in the middle. But yeah, so 8 core, you guys get it. So like 16 core should be 16 gigabyte of VRAM. 24 core should be 24 gigabyte of VRAM. And this is the reason why, I guess, what do I need to do here? You know what, let's delete all this stuff. Or is this, I mean, I'm in the way. Like, I'm in the way. But the point is, this is the reason why when I built my Threadripper system, because you guys remember, my Threadripper is a 24-core CPU. So I paired it up with 128 gigs of system RAM.
I only needed 48 gigabits because of the 4090's 24 gigabits VRAM. Big help, bro. Screenshot for build guide. Much appreciated. You saved me. Wish budget allowed to give more.
Yeah. So, but see, the math adds up, right? So the example that I'll give you is when I built the Threadripper system last year, the GPU that I selected to go with it, because I know it's a 24 core, which means for my Threadripper, I need to have at minimum a 24 gigabyte GPU, which means if I'm going to go with NVIDIA, I have to go with a 3090 or a 3090 Ti or a 4090. Those are the options for my Threadripper if I'm going with NVIDIA. If I'm going with AMD, I have to go with the 7900 XTX. So only now are consumer GPUs, since the RTX 30 series, consumer GPUs are only now, with the current and last generation, are they able to handle 24-core CPUs. This is the reason why you guys may have been wondering why is it that we have been on 16-core, 8-core, 12-core, 6-core for multiple generations now? Well, it's because there hasn't really been much of a reason in the consumer market to go beyond that. And you look at the VRAM, and you can see VRAM hasn't really deviated from that either. So it's interesting to look at, because this is the reason why, like, when you think of like a flagship AMD build, like an AMD GPU plus an AMD CPU build, so think of it like back in the day, think of like a 5950X. Think of like a 2020, or think of like a 2021 flagship all AMD build. What would this include? What would this include? And keep in mind, back in 2021, this is when GPUs were like so hard to get. That was the supply shortage year. That was the dark times. So think about this. So what would this have been? This would have been a Ryzen 9 5950X with a Radeon RX 6900 XT. What is this? This is a 16-core CPU. This is a 16 gigabyte GPU. Balanced build. The math checks out. The math checks out. So this would be a content creator build. This would be a balanced build for a content creator. This is the reason why if you guys look at like pre-build configurations, you'll see these type of configurations listed as content creator or workstation for Adobe Premiere. You'll see like these kind of systems with these labels. They won't really be labeled, or someone might label it as ultimate gaming system, but I wouldn't consider this like an ultimate gaming system even in 2021, because you wouldn't really need more than an 8-core CPU. But yeah, this is kind of a what we would consider a balanced build. But you can go more. You wouldn't really want to go less. And the RAM amount, the system memory, would be 64 gigabyte of 3200 mega transfer. Maybe 3600, it doesn't really matter. But 3200, it would probably be 4 sticks of DDR4 back in the day. But this would be the build. And that would be a balanced workstation. Not a true workstation, because Threadripper is technically a true workstation, but you guys get what I'm saying. Like, this is a balanced PC from 2021 that is meant for content creation or basically an all-rounder PC that can handle any sort of task, including virtualization and that sort of thing. So, the Linux PC is a 5700X, and okay, so that's an 8-core plus a 16 gigabyte. So you're oversized on VRAM, but that doesn't really, like, these are guidelines for productivity PCs. 6-core CPU, 24 gig, but with only 6 gig GPU would be really strange build, to be honest. Yeah, those 6 numbers would be weird, because you would, like, that would be basically a 2060, or not 2060. Yeah, that would be a 2060 build. A 2060. So, you know what that PC, Marcelo, that PC, you know what that would be? As soon as you said that, I was immediately thinking, okay, that would have been like a Ryzen 5 3600 with RTX 2060, because this is a 6 gig GPU. This is a 6-core CPU. Now, obviously the RAM, right? The RAM would not have been 24 gigs of RAM. Most likely, this would be 32 gigs of RAM. It would have been something like that. You know, you'd basically round up to the closest number. So it's not a problem to oversize, like I said. And that's not super oversizing. But this typically is what I would consider a balanced. This is actually, believe it or not, most people will probably running like anywhere between 16 or 32. But if they're 16 gigs of RAM, they're kind of undersized on the RAM from a Adobe guideline perspective. But this would be a decent PC from 2020 or late 2019 or even like summer 2019. So see, like, that fits the model. So these are the sort of things that I take into account. Like, if I'm helping somebody build a PC, I use this logic. I apply this logic when I'm helping somebody. When I'm recommending a build for somebody, I want to know the use case and I want to know the monitor resolution. Because if someone's going to be on 4K or if someone's going to be on 1080p, that is a huge factor in choosing the GPU. Yeah. Yeah, it could. But by that time, you got to remember, Matt, that by the time 3060, 3070 were more likely going to be paired up with Zen 3. But yeah, that could also have been paired up with a 3600. I feel like this pairing was way more common, though. This was a much more common configuration to run into back in the day. So, but yeah, this is the logic that I use. You guys don't have to follow this. I just know that if you do follow Adobe's guidelines, you're not going to be disappointed in terms of the overall experience on Windows, because the core, the bandwidth utilization, the memory bandwidth utilization, there's a reason why Adobe has this as their recommended guidelines for building PCs. And I think it's pretty good logic. It makes a lot of sense. Like, the more cores you have, the more system RAM you should have in general. You shouldn't have a 24-core CPU with like 32 gigs of RAM. Like, that's not a good idea. Because hyperthreading is a thing, you know? So you'd end up with 48 threads. You basically have more CPU threads than you would have actual gigs of memory at that point. Because my Threadripper is a 48 thread. It's 24 core, 48 thread. So it's a 48 thread monster CPU, which can eat up a lot of system RAM if you're running a lot of stuff. Is this guide from 2020? That's a good question. I've seen the guide. Let me see. I know I can't post the link. It shouldn't be too hard to find, though. Let me see. Adobe. Hold on. Adobe Premiere System Requirements. Let me see if I can find it. Hardware recommendations? Wait, where is it? It's somewhere on their website. I'm trying to find it right now. Okay, right here. Check it out. It's right in here. The amount of memory also impacts how After Effects can use available cores. AMD Ryzen 7 8-core or Ryzen 9 12 or 16-core deliver outstanding performance with Hold on. They do say... Here it is. Windows systems or Intel-based Mac video editing workstations should have 32... No, okay, here it is. Here it is. After Effects. We recommend starting with 64. As a rule of thumb, include 4 gigabytes of RAM for each core. Right there. 4 gigabytes of RAM. And they say this in other areas, not just in regards to After Effects. 4 gigs of RAM for each CPU core. But then they're saying, like, add 20 gigs, round to the nearest. Like, this is so like, for example, in the case of the example you gave earlier with the 6-core and 6 gigs of VRAM, like, the system RAM isn't going to be 24 gigs of RAM. They would basically do some kind of rounding up to the nearest standard. Round up to the nearest standard RAM configuration. So that typically would be 32 gigs of RAM. So, and then they also do say, somewhere in there, they do say 1 gigabyte of VRAM per core. They do say that somewhere for Premiere, in regards to like Premiere and their different software applications. But yeah, it's definitely a thing for productivity. So if you're building a gaming PC, you don't have to follow this. Most people won't even know that this is a thing. Like, but I would still say that if I was going to build a gaming PC, I would still follow this logic. Like, I would still do this. See, for very high-end performance, AMD Threadripper 24 or 32 core, or Intel Xeon 24 or 32 core, which support 250. What is he saying? The amount of memory also affects. I don't know what they're saying. For very high, just basically say do this. Okay, well that's okay. Yeah. So, but that's where it's from. It's an Adobe recommendation thing, but I think it's still good logic. It's good advice for someone who's trying to build a PC and they don't want to. They don't really know like how much RAM do I need, what's too much, what's too little. I think this is a good solid foundation if you're somebody building a PC and you don't really know what to do. I've always built PCs this way. That's the reason why, like, I tell somebody, like, if you really think you need a 12 core or a 16 core CPU, just know that you're going to end up spending more money on RAM and you're going to spend more money on a GPU. See? Because under this logic, like, the 4060 is useless for anything beyond an 8-core CPU. Anything beyond a 7800X3D, in terms of core count, you would need a vastly more expensive GPU. Like the GRE can be paired up with up to a 16-core CPU. After that, like if you're going beyond, like basically if you're going to a Threadripper, the GRE is not good enough for a Threadripper in terms of like VRAM allocation. Now, again, this all depends on the applications, right? Like someone would be like, oh, well, if I'm never going to use that much VRAM, why does it matter? Well, it does matter because there is an assumption that you're going to be using the CPU for a specific use case that's going to need these kind of resources. See? Otherwise, you should not spend money on that type of CPU. Like, if someone's building a gaming PC, that's the reason why the 7800X3D is such a good choice, because you only really need 32 gigs of RAM, and if you're on a 1080p high refresh monitor, you can still get away with an 8 gigabyte graphics card from like 1 or 2 generations before. Like you can get away with an RDNA 2 8 gig card or an RDNA 3 or even a GeForce 40 series like a 4060. That would be a good pairing with a 7800X3D for a 1080p gaming machine. You know what I'm saying? Like, you still get access to all the DLSS frame generation stuff, but you're on 1080p. So that's why the monitor resolution and the CPU itself dictate what type of GPU you should be getting. See, so those are the sort of things. Monitor and CPU, like I said in the beginning, the CPU is probably one of the most important decisions. Choosing the type of CPU, like the core count of the CPU, is a very important decision because that's going to determine like how much money you spend on RAM and what type of GPU you end up with. So anyway, yeah, the last thing, well, I guess we don't need to talk about Intel again. I was going to talk about like Intel said, I know we did a section on Intel last week regarding the issue with the core or the degradation. So they did release a statement. Intel is delivering a microcode patch which addresses the root cause of exposure to elevated voltages. We are continuing validation to ensure that scenarios of instability reported to Intel regarding its core Raptor Lake CPUs are addressed. Intel is currently targeting mid-August for patch release to partners following full validation. Intel is committed to making this right with our customers, and we continue asking our any customers currently experiencing instability issues on their Raptor Lake processors to reach out to Intel customer service for. So this basically means that 12th gen doesn't have the problem. So I'm very happy to hear that, because I have a launch model. This is a launch model 12700K Alder Lake. This has the AVX 512 capability. So I'm very happy to know that Alder Lake is not affected by this problem, because I don't want to lose my AVX 512. Like, if I had to RMA my AVX 512 Intel CPU, I'm pretty sure they would send me a newer one that doesn't have AVX 512. So I'm actually really glad that I don't have that Alder Lake is not affected, and this is really a Raptor Cove problem and not a Golden Cove problem. That microcode update will not be enough to fix the issue. It's possible. I mean, there are issues with oxidation on the silicon vias. If you guys remember last week, I talked about, like, my hypothesis was that the compute fabric has some kind of flaw. It turns out the oxidation problem is basically what I was thinking the problem could be. I just didn't know that that's what it was. You know, I knew it was something along those lines, but I didn't know that that's actually what it was. So now we kind of have an idea of one of the potential root causes. But it'll depend. I mean, right here, we can confirm that the VIA oxidation manufacturing issue affected some early Raptor Lake desktop processors. Notice that they're saying, early. Wait a minute. This thing, this CPU that I have is a launch day first batch 13900K. I bought this thing on the launch day of Raptor Lake back in October of 2022, on the first day that you could buy it. I was there at the front of the line to get my 13900K. The very first i9 that I ever purchased was a launch edition 13900K. And now they're saying that early 13th gen desktop processors, why are the 14th gen affected then? This can't, wait a minute. Oh man, I'm scared, Marcelo. I gotta run Dragon's Dogma 2 on this 1300K and see if it crashes. Because remember, you guys, I don't play games on my 1300K. Now I'm really terrified that I actually have a faulty CPU. I've probably been sitting on a faulty CPU for literally months, and I have no idea. Maybe even a year. Oh no. What? Oh man. Are you serious? It just had to be the early ones too. The price you pay for being an early adopter. But it says here, the issue was root caused and addressed with manufacturing improvements and screens in 2023. Well, I bought mine in 2022. We have also looked at it from the instability reports on Core 13 desktop, and the analysis to date has determined that only a small number of instability reports. Okay, so maybe I don't have the oxidation problem, but the other instability problem could be nothing related to oxidation. Do we know? Man, this is the problem with this stuff. When they're being all, like, vague. Although this is good details, but I wish there was a way where I could literally type in my serial number and they'd be able to tell me if I'm affected or not. I mean, I could straight up file for an RMA. This thing can't do AVX 512, so I don't really care. But I wish there was a way that I could tell based on a serial number or batch number. Because I've got my batch number. I got the sticker on the bottom still. It has the batch number. It has the serial number. I wish there was a way to tell. I know it's... I looked it up on their site last week. I know it's under warranty still. So it's under warranty until October of next year. I think, yeah, because that'll be 3 years. So it's a 3-year warranty. It has to do with how the voltage curve is and how long it was running for. Okay. Well, yeah, mine could be damaged. I have no idea of really knowing. Now I'm scared because if I start running like benchmarks and stuff on it, that's going to stress it with more voltage and current. But unfortunately, I'm going to have to do those tests. I'm going to have to find out if I have a defective one or not. And mine's a launch day model. Like, this is like the first batch. So, just like how my Ryzen, this is a launch day 7950X. Like, I bought this thing, I think what was the launch date? Like September, what was it? September 26, 2022 or something? Like, let's see. What does it say? Does it say on their website? Oh, I was off by 1 day. I said September 26, 2022. It was September 27th, 2022. So that's the day that I got mine. And on the Intel, I got this on, what was it, October something? October 20th was the retail launch. October 20th, 2022. That's when I bought my Intel, my very first i9. Funnily enough, the 750X is also the very first Ryzen 9 CPU. Prior to these two CPUs, I never had a 9 SKU. Like, I only ever bought like a 7 SKU. I had the 5800X, the 3800X, the 1800X, the 12700K, the 4770K. So it's like I never had a 9 until 2022. Do you think this can turn into a potential lawsuit? I don't think so. I think if it does, it would not start with consumers. It would start with like businesses. It would be enterprise customers that sue them for damages. I don't think it would be regular consumers. I don't know. I don't think it's large enough scale for the consumer market to be a lawsuit. It's not like a GTX. Do you guys remember the GTX 970 3.5 gigabyte plus 512 megabyte fiasco? That turned into a lawsuit years ago for NVIDIA. That was public, regular people suing NVIDIA. I don't think the Intel thing will turn into that because that was strictly consumers being affected. This is like not just regular consumers and PC DIY gamers and hobbyists. This is like actual companies that are having problems in their data centers because they wanted to be cheap, so they bought these on the cheap and paired them up with like, you know, W680, whatever the enterprise server chipset was for the data center. They stuck these in there thinking that, oh, I'm smart. I saved a bunch of money. I didn't buy Threadripper. I didn't buy Epic. I didn't buy Xeon. I bought a bunch of cheap i9s. Well, now they're really paying for it. So whether or not they're going to be able to win any sort of legal battle with their lawyers against Intel, that remains to be seen. I don't think they're going to have a good case to stand on, though, because Intel's put out a statement. Intel's tried to fix the problem with multiple BIOS revisions. This one for August is going to be like the third BIOS update that I've had to do on my Intel Z790 Aorus Master for like... I feel like I've done a BIOS update for my 13900K literally every month since April. And now we're going to do another one in August. So... they've been trying to do BIOS updates, and I don't know if they're actually fixing the problem. I've updated the BIOS like, 4 times now in like 4 months. So, and we're going to do a 5th one next month. So, yeah, I don't know. You think if anyone needs to be sued, it's NVIDIA for the 12 volt high power connector for thousands of GPUs being ruined? Isn't it funny how NVIDIA can just like get off scotch-free? That was like a straight up fire hazard, and no one's actually threatened them with litigation. Yet people managed to sue them over like 512 megabytes of VRAM for false advertising. People were able to sue them and win for false advertising. Meanwhile, like, people have potential fire hazard damage to their homes or apartments, and yeah, no one's been able to bring any sort of legal battle to them on that. That is hilarious. That is weird. You do have a good point there, Matt, though. That's actually very interesting. No one has really brought that up, about NVIDIA being sued about the whole, like, power connector thing. I'm surprised no one's done that. The only reason why I can think that no one's done it is because there's just not enough people that have had the problem. Like, compared to the... So let's put it this way. The number of people that bought GTX 970s is so much higher in terms of volume compared to the number of people that bought RTX 4090s. So it's like the difference is so, like, the difference is just too great, like, to compare them. So that's why Intel doing the stealth quiet RMA approach. I think that's what they're going to keep doing. Jeb, I really think that Intel's just going to silently just RMA. They're just going to do... They're going to implement a policy that large companies that manufacture things like this, they call this... You know what they call this? This is called fix on failure. So there's going to be no proactive RMA. There's going to be no communication in terms of like, oh, we fixed it with a new stepping. They're literally just going to silently RMA, and eventually there will be a new stepping. They're not going to say what that stepping is. Some tech enthusiasts will probably figure it out. It'll leak to the internet somehow, some way, whenever it happens. But that's going to be months from now. And until then, they're just going to keep silently RMAing the CPUs until they get the revision, and then that actually fixes the problem. And then they'll just keep RMAing the CPUs with the newer ones that have the newer revision. And then eventually, a year from now, this will probably be swept under the rug, and no one will really talk about it, except the people that had to go through the RMA process. So that's how it's going to be handled. It's going to be what's called fix on failure. Fix on failure. No field notice, no proactive RMA, no communication. Just if you have the problem, you RMA it. If it happens again, they'll just RMA it again. And you'll just have to keep RMAing it until it eventually goes away. So, but see, that process that I described, having to RMA it again and again until it finally goes away permanently, that is the sort of thing that will make people switch to AMD. Like, that is the sort of thing, like, if someone has to RMA it one time, they'll probably be okay. But if it happens again, like in my case, if it turns out my launch day 13900K is defective and I have to RMA it, and they send me a 14900K as the replacement, and then like 6 months from now, guess what? It's happening again. I got to RMA 14900K, because you're literally without a CPU for basically a month. You're basically without a CPU for a month. It takes it like a week. You ship it off to them. Like, let's put it this way. If I have to ship this to Intel, they're going to send me a tracking label. I send it to UPS. I drop it off at UPS or FedEx or whoever. They're going to, if I do it on a Monday, they're going to send it. It's going to get to Intel on like a Thursday of that week. Then they're going to sit there. It's not going to do anything on Friday. Then on Monday, the following week, they're going to check it in. Someone's going to scan the barcode. Yeah, okay, it's this batch. This one's definitely affected. Then they're going to be like, okay, RMA it. It's a launch model. It's so obvious. It's a launch model. Just give them a new one. Okay, we don't have any 13900Ks because we end of life. We EOL'd our 13900K. So we're going to upgrade him. They're going to send me an email. It's going to like, good news. We're going to to make things right, we're going to upgrade you. We're going to upgrade you from the 13900K all the way to the amazing, brand new, current generation 14900K. Free upgrade. It's Raptor Leg. Oh, free upgrade. Yeah. So they're going to send me a 14900K, which is basically just a 13900K. And then 6 months from now, okay, Dragon's Dogma 2 compiling shaders is crashing again. Okay, here we go again. RMA, okay. Good news, we were able to send you one that doesn't have the problem. So I'll probably have to do with like 2 RMAs, you know, like, it's hilarious. It's hilarious. It's going to be called Fix on Failure. I'm going to have to do an RMA. And if I was somebody who this was my only computer, I would be so angry because I would literally have no desktop for like 3 weeks. And then eventually it'll probably happen again. I'll have to RMA it again, you know? Unless I get lucky and it doesn't happen anymore. Because not all of them are affected. That's the thing. It's kind of a coin toss. So, yeah. That's a legit industry term. Yep, Fix on Failure. Did they say if these failures affect mobile CPUs too? I don't know. I don't think so. That's not what they said. That's not what they said in the statement. They specifically say, but here's the thing, guys. They even say that the oxidation issue does not apply to 14th gen. When they talk about the silicon vias having oxidation problems from manufacturing, they're specifically calling out early 13th gen. They say 13. They don't say 13/14. We've also looked at it from the instability reports on the 13th gen. And notice here, 13th gen desktop. Desktop, not laptop, not desktop/laptop. No, desktop. And then they say reports on 13th gen desktop. So I don't think it applies to the laptop. And again, up here, delivering microcode patch addresses. Okay, well, I don't know. I'm not too happy about having to go and like run benchmarks on the 1300K to see if it's affected. You know what I might actually do? Knowing how I operate, I really don't want to do the RMA unless I have no other choice. I'm probably going to wait. I'm probably going to wait until the microcode update before I run those benchmarks. Because if I'm on a bad BIOS that burns up the CPU and causes this problem or accelerates this problem, I would rather wait for the microcode update next month. Then after I update the BIOS, then I will run all the benchmarks and see like all the things that require shader compile. Dragon's Dogma 2, The Last of Us, even Jedi Survivor has compiling shaders. I'll just run all the CPU bottleneck games that have shader compile. Lords of the Fallen, UE5 with shader compile. I'll just run all those type of games on the Intel CPU, see what happens, see if it's good or not. I may actually have to use that as a desktop instead of a server to see if it's... Because I don't normally monitor that CPU all the time, the way I'm using like the Ryzen CPU all the time. So I don't know. I'm going to have to... Yeah, that's going to be a pain because that's going to require a bunch of like cycles spent like babysitting an Intel CPU and seeing if it has a problem. Yeah, I'm not looking forward to this. But it could be worse. At least that it's not my only computer. It just so happens to be the only Intel computer that I currently have operating. All the other computers that I'm using right now are Ryzen CPUs. Like, I have the 12 gen sitting in the box, so I can switch over to this if I have to. So it's not the end of the world. So I do have Alder Lake as a backup. But yeah. Anyway, that's probably going to be it for this stream. The big disappointing thing of the week was AMD having to delay the launch, because I really wanted to review this next week, but now we gotta wait an extra week, so that's kind of annoying. What's funny is they haven't even sent review samples out yet. They're probably gonna send the review samples out next week. So I don't know what the embargo is gonna be weird, because they have two different release dates now. So Ryzen 7 and Ryzen 5 will be on August 8th. That means that the reviews will probably be on the 6th or the 7th. Intel used to be the business preferred reliable CPU. Upgrade RMA replacement is the 14901KE. You may need to invoice them. Yeah, I don't know what they're going to do. All I know is they are just going to keep RMAing it, because that's what they're doing with the enterprise customers. In fact, what they've done, they've literally sent trays chock full of new CPUs over to the data center customers. It's like, here's a bunch of CPU, just try these and see if they fix the problem. I mean, okay. It'd be nice to know what the actual issue was caused by, but oh well. Yeah, but the reality is Intel's so big that they're kind of too big to fail. Like, people can complain about them and hate on them, but they're probably gonna be fine. Like, let's be honest, like, some people will switch to AMD. A lot of people don't even have i9, so they don't even care. It doesn't even affect them. So, I don't think it's going to really do much in terms of their reputation. It'll damage their reputation at the high end. Like, at the enthusiast level, it will damage their reputation. But the average gamer, they're not really affected by it. I don't think it's going to change much. So let's put it this way. Intel's so big that they can survive from this reputational damage, and it won't really have long-term effects on them. If the roles were reversed, if this was a problem with AMD instead, this would be far more damaging to AMD than it is to Intel, because AMD is much smaller than Intel. So a smaller company doesn't have as much slack in terms of, or leverage in the public's eye to survive from this kind of problem. So, yeah, I'm not worried about Intel at all. No, they're a huge company. They've been around forever. They've been making CPUs forever. It's like, yeah, they messed up, whatever. If someone is mad at them and they want to switch to AMD, they don't really care. Honestly, they don't care. Like, if you want to go to AMD, okay, fine, go to AMD. Whatever. Who cares? Like, they really don't care, because the i9 market is so small compared to their laptop market that they're far more concerned with ARM, Qualcomm, and, like, what's happening in the laptop market. And that's why you see a lot of their effort going into the whole, like, Lunar Lake launch and rebranding and dropping hyper-threading, because that's kind of what Apple did first in laptops, and now they're like, oh, let's do the same thing. So, that's kind of where it's at. That's where their priorities are right now. That, and also trying to prevent losing more market share to AMD in the data center, in the server market. And it isn't even just AMD. It's really also the ARM-based CPUs coming into the server market. So that is actually where Intel's more afraid in terms of where they could potentially lose more business. It's actually against ARM than it is AMD. So, anyway. Alright, guys. Well, unfortunately, I was going to, like, next week's Tech Thursdays was going to be all about, like, the Zen 5 launch, but that's going to be delayed for another week. And then, even then, we're not going to be able to talk about Ryzen 9 for another 2 weeks. So, actually, no. From today, it's literally 3 weeks for Ryzen 9. So, Yeah, that's unfortunate that that got delayed. I was really looking forward to that launch. But anyway, that's probably going to be it. Not a whole lot of different things. Like, it's still, like, everything right now is all CPU focused. Are you still going to stream this week? I don't know if I'm going to stream this week. I don't know what there is to stream this week, to be honest. Like, Final Fantasy 14, I've played so much Final Fantasy 14 that I'm almost burned out of that game at this point. There isn't really anything for me to do except log in and do, like, my weekly, like, once a week raid that I do. I mean, I'm not really going to do the super hard... I'm not super hardcore into raiding in Final Fantasy anymore the way I was years ago. I don't really have that much time to invest in raiding in an MMO anymore, unfortunately. But, yeah, I don't know. I don't know what I'm going to do. Maybe... I mean, we can revisit... People were telling me I should play World of Warcraft. I don't know why. I know they have an expansion coming up, but I don't really think... I don't know. Retail WoW is so different from how I remember World of Warcraft back in the day. I don't know if I'm going to cover that. I know we got Wukong. We got Black Myth Wukong next month. What else is coming out next month? That's it, right? That's literally it. That and World of Warcraft. I'm just looking here. What else is coming out? Just like nothing. Black Myth Wukong. Astrobot comes out in September. That's PS5. Silent Hill 2 is in October. There's like nothing, guys. There's like no games. So I don't know. If I do like a weekend stream, I don't even know what I would do. Like if it's a game, maybe Trails Through Daybreak again. Is Ys 10 coming out in international release? I don't know. I do need to do benchmarks for a lot of these CPUs for the Zen 5 review, so I will definitely be working on that. But I don't think I'm going to be live streaming me doing benchmarks. So, that's boring. That's just recording data, putting data into an Excel spreadsheet, and just doing a bunch of test runs, and then averaging across like 3 runs each time, and then next benchmark, next benchmark. Ys is on the 25th of October. Oh, you know, Shadows of the Damned is coming out. The remix. I think I saw an article about that. Hella Remix or something? What is it called? Where is it? Suda51's game from like 2011 is coming out. It's remastered or something. Why is this website so bad sometimes in terms of... Yeah, this game. This game's coming out. This game is a classic, man. This is a cult classic, just like Silent Hill 2. Shadows of the Damned, hella remastered. Hella remastered. Its official release date. I think this is October also. It's coming out October 31st. October 31st. You can play it on the Nintendo Switch at 30 frames per second. But otherwise, it'll be 60 FPS and 4K support, giving players that's on all the other platforms. So yeah, this is a game that I might actually visit. I mean, I was trying to think like what's coming out in the second half of the year besides like Black Myth Wukong, which is probably going to be a benchmark more than an actual game. There's really just Silent Hill 2 and this. Like, there's like nothing else. Maybe a bunch of random live service games, like that one, like First Descendant came out, and then there was like another shooter PUBG thing that came out like last week or something, or this week. I don't know. I'm not really into those type of games. They're free to play, so I might actually try them, but they're not my thing. Like this though, this and the other game that they did, Lollipop Chainsaw and Shadows of the Damned, these are like the games that have needed... These have been in dire need of remix or remasters or reprints, whatever you want to call it, because these are like the hidden gems of the PS3 era. Like, these are some of the best PS3 games, and they're now coming to PC after literally more than 10 years. So it's fantastic news. But yeah, like, these are the type of games that are going to be really good. And I think Suda51 is in talks with Marvel to make like a Deadpool game. I mean, that was the rumor. But if anyone was going to make, if they were going to farm out a Deadpool game and have it be actually good, it would be somebody like Suda51 that would actually make the game good. So, yeah. Anyway, guys, that's going to be it for this stream. I feel like we're just going to keep repeating the same thing at this point. We've kind of talked about Zen 5 and talked about Intel's problems, and Zen 5 got delayed, and there's no new motherboards for another month and a half or whatever. So, anyway, I guess I'll leave it at that. We will be back next Thursday. I have no idea what we're going to talk about next week, because it's literally going to be probably Zen 5 again. And we've talked about Zen 5 now for the last 3 weeks straight. But there's really nothing else to talk about. Unless you guys want to talk about like upcoming video games, which again, there's really nothing to talk about there. So unless you're into MMOs or something, or live service games, you have a 13, it's not a good CPU. Well, I mean, that one's not really listed in the field notice, but it could be, potentially. Hey, Jeb, thanks for the hard work, research, and tips. Sincerely appreciate 7960X build video. Oh, okay. Yeah, the live stream. That one was back in November, I think, of last year. Oh, you have instability problems? Yeah. Yeah, that's kind of a thing these days. Alright, guys, but I will say this. We will be doing more motherboard-related content once the X870 motherboards start getting shown more. Like, expect to see tier list videos, recommended motherboard videos for Zen 5, and that sort of thing. That stuff will come later. I mean, it's weird that they're not launching together, but everything's kind of pushed out now. So it's like what I thought I was going to be making videos on in August will now most likely be happening at the very end of August into September. And what I thought I was going to make videos about in early August is now going to be more like mid-August. Everything for me has basically been shifted over by like 2 weeks, all because AMD has delayed the launch. So, but yeah, expect to see more content on this channel regarding motherboards, DDR5. We're going to be looking at DDR5 overclocking. We're going to look at the CPU overclocking, check out Curve Shaper, Curve Optimizer, optimizing the system, how to run the system in like an eco mode, how to run the system in a high performance mode if you want to do that. So lots of AMD related content is coming up in the near future here. We will also visit the Intel Microcode update. I'm definitely going to be following that story. That's probably the only thing that we're going to talk about on Intel, though, is the microcode fix. But for AMD, it's going to be like motherboard, DDR5, CPU overclocking, memory overclocking. We're going to reevaluate memory training, how memory context restore may have changed, how the fabric may have changed, all these things. So we're gonna evaluate everything that AMD has shown in the slides. We're going to validate and evaluate a lot of that stuff in the field. So if you guys like this sort of content, get subscribed to the channel. It does motivate me to keep making this type of content. Like, if you like this content, like the video, like the live stream, it does help me. At the very least, it motivates me, but it also does help YouTube also recommend my videos more to a wider audience. So I appreciate that. And with that being said, I will see you guys next week, next Thursday on Tech Thursdays. Until then, take care, and I'll see you guys next time. Thanks.